The military dog stopped mid-ceremony, ignored every command, and crawled across the hospital floor to collapse at the feet of a tired ER nurse nobody had ever noticed. She hadn't touched him, hadn't called to him, hadn't moved. He found her anyway, trembling, whining, pressing his scarred muzzle against her boots like a soldier who had just located someone he'd spent years trying to find. The crowd went silent. Hospital executives didn't ask why. They blamed her. "Get that woman out of this building," the operations director said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The nurse didn't flinch. She looked down at the dog and said the only thing she'd say for the next 10 minutes. "He came to me." Nobody understood what that meant yet. If you've ever watched someone get torn apart for something they didn't do, hit that subscribe button right now because this story is going to take you somewhere you won't expect. Like this video, drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The ceremony had started at 7 in the morning, which meant the people who'd worked through the night were the ones standing in the lobby at 7 in the morning pretending they weren't half dead. Claire Morrow was one of them. She'd been on shift since 7 the previous evening, 12 hours in the emergency department of Hargrove Medical Center in Fort Caldwell, Nevada, which was not a small hospital and was not a quiet night. She'd triaged a construction worker with a rebar through his shoulder, managed a pediatric seizure that had taken 40 minutes to bring under control, and spent the last 2 hours of her shift attempting to stabilize a woman in her 50s whose family kept interrupting to ask whether they could get the paperwork started for a private room upgrade. She was 32 years old, 5'6", with dark circles under her eyes that no amount of foundation was going to fix, and a hospital badge that read Morrow, C, RN, ER. She wore her dark hair pulled back in a tight knot at the base of her skull, which wasn't a style choice, it was a function choice, because hair in the ER was a liability. She had a habit of pressing her thumbnail against the inside of her wrist when she was thinking through a problem. Not anxiety, just a reset, something to anchor her when everything else was moving too fast. She had not planned to attend the ceremony. She'd been heading toward the staff exit when the lobby filled up. Hospital board members in suits, a local news crew repositioning their camera equipment near the front desk, 2 Army officers in dress uniform standing at attention near the main doors. Someone had arranged flowers on the reception counter, yellow and white, which looked wrong against the institutional beige of everything else. "What's this?" she asked Marcus Webb, the charge nurse from the night team, who was lingering by the vending machines and clearly also trying to leave. "Community partnership thing," Marcus said, not looking up from his phone. "Army brought one of their trauma K9 teams, PR photo op. Administration's been planning it for 3 weeks." "Great," Claire said, and adjusted the strap of her bag. She was almost to the door. The dog came through the main entrance at 7:14, walking alongside his handler, a young sergeant named Alvarez, who held the leash with practiced ease and scanned the room with the flat professional attention of someone trained to read environments. The dog was a Belgian Malinois, big for the breed, maybe 80 pounds, with a dark mask and a scar that ran along the left side of his jaw in a way that hadn't healed quite flat. His name was stenciled on his vest, Rico. The lobby applause started immediately. Someone from administration, Hargrove's operations director, a man named Douglas Fitch, who wore his authority the way some people wore cologne, as much as possible, stepped forward to greet them and began talking about community relationships and the hospital's commitment to serving those who served. Claire was not listening. She was watching the dog. Rico had been perfectly composed walking in, moving in the careful, controlled way working dogs moved, neither tense nor loose, just calibrated. But something happened when he got 20 feet inside the lobby. He slowed. His head came up. His nostrils flared once, twice, and then his entire body changed. Not aggression, not alertness, something else. He turned. He pulled against the leash in Claire's direction, not toward anyone near her, not toward anything she could identify, directly toward her, and Sergeant Alvarez reacted immediately, correcting with a short tug and a quiet command. Rico checked for exactly 1 second, then he pulled again, harder, and when Alvarez tried a second correction, the dog sat down entirely, refusing to move forward. "Rico, heel!" Alvarez's voice was firm and low. "Heel!" Rico didn't heel. He turned his head toward Claire, let out a single low sound that wasn't quite a whine and wasn't quite a bark. and then he lowered himself flat to the floor and began crawling toward her. 80 pounds of trained military animal, belly to the floor, trembling, moving toward a tired ER nurse holding a canvas bag near the staff exit. The lobby went completely quiet. Alvarez was on his feet, following, uncertain. Because a dog that moved like this wasn't a dog having a behavioral episode. It was a dog that had found something, and you didn't jerk a dog away from something like this until you understood what it was. He let the leash go long and followed. Claire didn't move. She watched Rico crawl the last 10 feet to her boots, lift his scarred face, and rest his chin on her left foot with a sound like something releasing, pressure leaving a system that had been holding it too long. His whole body shook once, then settled. She looked down at him for a moment. Then she crouched slowly and put one hand against the side of his neck. He pressed into it. "What happened?" Alvarez said, watching them both with an expression Claire couldn't fully read, somewhere between professional confusion and something more personal. "He doesn't do this." "I know," Claire said. "You know? What do you mean, you know?" She didn't answer that. She just kept her hand against the dog's neck and let him breathe. Which was the exact moment Douglas Fitch arrived. Fitch was 51, heavy-set in the way men got when they ate lunch meetings for 15 years, with silver at his temples that he'd clearly decided was distinguished, and a habit of speaking at a volume calibrated for rooms larger than the one he was currently in. He'd built his career at Hargrove on metrics, patient throughput, operational efficiency, budget variance, and he treated every situation the way he treated a spreadsheet. Problems were data points, and data points needed to be corrected. "Nurse," he stopped 3 feet away. "What did you do?" Claire looked up. "Nothing. This dog was responding normally until you were involved. What did you do to him?" "I didn't do anything to him. I was standing here." "You interfered with a military animal during an official hospital function. Do you understand what that means?" He turned toward the army officers who had moved closer but hadn't spoken. "I apologize for this. She's going to be removed immediately." "Sir," Alvarez started, "we'll handle this." Fitch pulled out his phone. "Get me HR, and get security over here." Claire stood up slowly. Rico stood with her, pressing against her left leg. "He came to me," she said. Not loudly, not defensively. Just as a statement of fact, the way she'd state a patient's blood pressure. Fitch stared at her like she'd said something in a foreign language. "Excuse me?" "I said he came to me. I didn't go to him. I didn't call him. I didn't do anything. He walked across this lobby and came to me." She looked at Rico, who was still pressed against her leg. Maybe instead of calling HR, someone might want to figure out why. The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. Then Fitch said, very quietly, "You're done for the day. Go home. Don't come back until you've heard from us." "My shift already ended." "Then you've already been here too long." She looked at him. She looked at the 2 army officers, who were watching this exchange with carefully neutral expressions. She looked at Sergeant Alvarez, who was watching Rico and not looking at anyone. Then she picked up her bag. She was halfway to the door when Marcus appeared at her elbow, voice low. Claire, don't just walk out. Tell them. Just explain what happened." "I did," she said. "They're not interested." "So what are you going to do?" She pushed the door open. "Go home. Sleep 4 hours. Come back for my next shift." She glanced back at him. "What else would I do?" She was in the parking structure, fishing her keys out of the front pocket of her bag, when she heard it. First the intercom. 3 short tones. A system alert. Then, from inside the hospital, muffled through 3 floors of concrete and glass, something that her body recognized before her mind processed it. 2 shots. A pause. 1 more. She stopped walking. The intercom crackled. "Lockdown. Emergency department. All non-essential personnel shelter in place. Repeat. Lockdown. Emergency department." She was already turning around. The ER entrance was on the south side of the building, separate from the main lobby, and by the time Claire reached it, the automatic doors were locked down, and 2 security guards were stationed outside, looking at each other like they were waiting for someone to tell them what to do. "You can't go in," one of them said. His name tag read Burnham. He was young, maybe 23, and his hands were doing something at his sides that wasn't quite shaking. "I'm ER staff," Claire said. "Nobody goes in. There's an active situation." "I know there's an active situation. That's why I need to go in." She scanned the situation through the glass doors. She could see the triage desk, a toppled IV stand, a man in a patient gown crouched behind the nurse's station. She couldn't see the shooter. How many casualties? Burnham blinked. We don't have that information yet. Then someone needs to get it. Has anyone actually been inside since lockdown? He and the other guard exchanged a look. The other one, older, with a stripe on his sleeve, said, Active shooter protocol is shelter in place until law enforcement arrives. Shelter in place is for people who can't do anything. I can do something. She looked through the glass again. There's a patient behind the nurse's station. I can see at least one other person on the floor near Bay 3. How long until law enforcement gets here? Dispatch said, How long? Maybe 12 minutes. 12 minutes in a trauma situation with active casualties was a variable that had a body count attached to it. She pulled her badge off her scrubs and held it up. I'm going in. Ma'am, I cannot let you then physically stop me. She swiped her badge on the side panel. The reader rejected it. They'd locked the cards out. She looked at the panel, then at the guards, then at the manual override switch mounted to the wall inside the security booth 6 feet away, behind a glass panel that wasn't locked. She walked to the booth, opened the panel, and hit the override. The ER doors opened. Burnham made a sound like he was going to object, and then apparently decided the calculus didn't work in his favor. Claire went in. The ER was not chaos, exactly. Chaos was the wrong word. Chaos implied randomness, and what she walked into had a pattern she could read in about 4 seconds. Most of the clinical staff had retreated to the back corridors and locked themselves in. The patients who could move had moved, into supply closets, behind curtains, under beds, anywhere with solid cover. The ones who couldn't move were still in their bays, some of them aware of what was happening, some of them not. The armed man was in Bay 5. He was sitting on the floor against the bed, and he'd been shot. She could tell from the way he was holding his right arm, the dark stain spreading through the sleeve of his jacket, the particular stillness of someone who was running on adrenaline and wouldn't feel the full extent of what was happening to his body for another 20 minutes. He was holding a handgun at his side, but it wasn't raised. His eyes tracked to her immediately when she came in. He was maybe 40. Hard to tell with the blood loss and the pallor. He had the gun. He had a wound. He had the expression of someone who had made a decision they hadn't fully thought through and was now inside the consequence of it. Don't, he said. His voice was rough. Don't come over here. I'm not coming to you, she said. I need to check the patient in Bay 3. A pause. What? The patient in Bay 3. She pointed without taking her eyes off him. She was already here before whatever this is. She needs to be assessed. I'm a nurse. That's what I'm going to do. He stared at her. You can watch me the whole time, she said. I'm not going to try anything. I just need to know if she's okay. Another pause. The gun didn't come up. She moved to Bay 3. The patient was a woman in her 60s named, she checked the chart clipped to the end of the bed, Harriet Bowman, presenting with chest pain. She was awake, pale, her pulse rapid when Claire pressed 2 fingers to her wrist. It's okay, Claire said quietly. I'm here. Just breathe. There's a man with a gun, Harriet whispered. I know. I'm going to take care of you, and then I'm going to help him too. She reached past the bed for the supply cart and found a pulse ox clip, put it on Harriet's finger, checked the reading. Oxygen sat at 91. Not catastrophic, but moving in a direction. She pulled the oxygen mask from the hook on the wall and placed it over Harriet's face. Small breaths. Don't try to talk. She moved to Bay 1 next. A man with a head laceration, conscious, terrified. She checked his pupils, both reactive, pressed a pressure bandage against the cut on his scalp, and told him to hold it there. Bay 2. Empty. Bay 4. A teenage boy with a broken wrist, hiding under the bed, who looked at her from the floor with wide eyes. Stay there, she said. You're doing exactly the right thing. Then she went back to Bay 5. The man with the gun watched her come. I need to look at your arm, she said. No. You're bleeding internally. The jacket is soaked through. If that round hit anything significant, you have maybe 30 minutes before your pressure drops enough that it won't matter who shows up. She met his eyes. I'm not asking you to put the gun down. I'm asking you to let me slow the bleeding. Why would you do that? Because you're a patient. That's my job. He looked at her for a long moment. I was trying to figure out if she was running a play on him. She could see it. The calculation behind the eyes, the suspicion, the desperate checking of exits and angles. What's your name? She asked. Why? Because I'm not going to call you the man with the gun in my head for the next 10 minutes. Something shifted in his face. Garrett, he said. Daniel Garrett. Okay, Daniel. She crouched down to his level, which put her below his sight line and made her less threatening, and also meant she didn't have to look up at the overhead fluorescents, which had been giving her a headache since she walked back in. I'm Claire. I'm going to need scissors to get this sleeve off. They're in the supply cart. Can I get them? A beat. Yeah, he said. Go slow. Always, she said, and meant it, and went to get the scissors. She cut the sleeve off and found a through and through in the upper arm just lateral to the bicep, which had missed the brachial artery by what looked like maybe 2 centimeters. She packed it with gauze from the cart, applied pressure, wrapped it with the bandaging roll she found in the second drawer. Daniel Garrett said nothing while she worked. His breathing was controlled in the way people breathed when they were managing pain by sheer determination, which was not a strategy with a long shelf life. What happened? She asked. Not as an interrogation, just as a question. He looked at the opposite wall. My son was a patient here 14 months ago. She kept her hands working. Okay. He came in with appendicitis, normal surgery. Went in at 10 in the morning. They said it was routine. His jaw tightened. He didn't come out. She didn't say she was sorry. People said they were sorry when they didn't know what else to say, and it usually landed like a closed door. How old was he? 17. She secured the bandaging with tape from the cart. What was his name? Miles. He said it like the word cost something. They said it was a complication. That's what they called it. A complication. Like it was just something that happens and nobody's to blame and you just... He stopped. She looked at him. You didn't believe that. I spent 14 months trying to find out what actually happened. Nobody would talk to me. Nobody would give me his records. I filed 3 requests. 2 got denied. 1 came back redacted down to almost nothing. He finally looked at her. I came here today because I didn't know what else to do. Shooting people wasn't going to get you the records. I know that. His voice cracked. I know, I didn't plan this. I came in and Fitch was standing at the front desk and I just... Did you shoot him? No, I fired at the ceiling, twice. People ran. He ran. A pause. The guard didn't run. He came at me and I... He stopped again. Claire looked at the bandage. Clean through, no major vessel involvement. She was reasonably confident. The guard. Where is he? Down the hall. Bay 7. She stood up, which made him tense again, the gun coming slightly up. I'm going to check on him, she said. I'll be 20 feet away. You can see me the whole time. Daniel Garrett looked at the gun in his hand like he'd momentarily forgotten it was there. Then he lowered it to the floor and pressed his palm flat over it, and she understood that was the best she was going to get, and she took it. Bay 7 was where the security guard was. Not Burnham, the older one with the stripe on his sleeve, whose name tag read Kowalski. He was conscious, shot in the thigh, had managed to get a tourniquet on himself from the kit mounted to the wall, which told her he'd had some training. She tightened it, checked his color, asked him his pain level. 8, he said through his teeth. Okay. You're doing okay. The tourniquet's working. She checked his pulse. Present. Strong. Law enforcement is 12 minutes out, probably less by now. You hold this pressure for me. Is there more of them? Kowalski asked. Just 1, she said. I'm handling it. He looked at her with the slightly unfocused expression of someone managing significant pain. You're handling it. Yeah. By yourself. I work ER nights, she said. This is not actually the strangest thing that's happened to me this week. She was back at Bay 5 when she heard the outer doors. Not the front entrance, the secondary trauma bay doors on the north side. The ones that required a department-level badge that very few people had. Open with the controlled, sequential sound of a tactical entry. She straightened up. Daniel Garrett heard it too. His hand went to the gun. Don't, she said very quietly. Don't pick it up. Whatever you do right now matters more than everything that came before it. Put your hands where they can see them. They're going to be... Your son's name was Miles, and he deserved better than what happened to him. You picking up that gun does not get him closer to any kind of answer. She held his gaze. Put your hands up. The tactical team came around the corner in tight formation. 4 of them, full kit, weapons up, and stopped. They stopped because the ER was not the scene they'd been briefed on. It was quiet. The patients were stable. The shooter was on the floor with his hands visible and no weapon in them. A woman in scrubs with dark circles under her eyes was standing between the tactical team and the armed man, not flinching, her hands at her sides. The team leader, a compact man with Valdez on his vest, surveyed the room in a single sweep. His weapon stayed up for exactly 3 more seconds. Then he lowered it slightly. Clear the room, he said to his team. Then to Claire. Ma'am, step away from him. He needs medical transport, she said, through and through to the upper arm. No arterial involvement that I can identify, but he needs imaging to confirm. He also has a guard down in Bay 7, tourniquet applied, femoral area. That one's more urgent. Valdez stared at her. Bay 7, she said again. Now. He sent 2 of his team. Then he looked at her, and something in his expression shifted, not much, but enough. He pulled the radio from his vest, keyed it. Command, this is Valdez. ER is secure. 1 gunman in custody, medically compromised. 1 security officer down, treated on scene by... He looked at her badge. RN Morrow. A pause. Also, I need you to run a name for me. The radio crackled. The name is Morrow, first name Claire. Pull whatever you've got. She looked at him. Why? Because, Valdez said, and his voice had changed, gone careful in a way she recognized from a long time ago, from a different version of herself. I've seen the way you just ran that room, and I want to know who I'm actually looking at. The radio came back fast, faster than standard database queries came back. Way faster. Valdez listened. His expression didn't change, but his posture did. Some small recalibration, some internal adjustment she could read without being able to name it. He looked at her. It says your record's been flagged, he said. Says there's a classified notation, and it says... He stopped, started again. How long have you been in Nevada? 3 years, Claire said. And before that? She looked at him steadily. Before that I was somewhere else. Ma'am. His voice had dropped. Professional. But something else underneath it. The system is asking for a secondary verification. That only happens for 2 kinds of records. He held her gaze. And you don't look like a foreign national. From somewhere in the hospital, not in the ER, above them, the lobby, came the sound of running feet, multiple people, the low, urgent sound of a situation expanding. Then Douglas Fitch's voice, cutting through the overhead intercom with the specific indignation of a man who had lost control of something and was furious about it. I want that nurse found immediately. I want her detained. She violated lockdown protocol, and I will have her badge by end of business. Valdez heard it. He looked up at the ceiling, then back at Claire. Then he pressed his radio again. Command, don't close that record. Hold it open and get me a senior verification contact. A beat. Yes, I'll wait. Claire looked at the floor of the ER, the toppled IV stand, the scattered gauze wrappers, Harriet Bowman in Bay 3 with her oxygen mask still in place, breathing steadily now. Daniel Garrett with his hands visible and his eyes closed, face wet. She looked at her own hands, the tape and gauze residue, the small nick on her right knuckle she'd gotten somewhere in the last hour, and not noticed. The radio in Valdez's hand came back to life. The voice on the other end said 4 words she hadn't heard spoken in 3 years. And Claire Morrow's expression, for the first time since she'd walked back into the building, went very still. The voice on the radio said, Confirm identity. Captain Claire Carter, 75th Medical Brigade, Special Operations attached. Declared inactive 3 years ago. Record sealed under executive order. Valdez didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Then he lowered the radio slowly, the way you lowered something fragile, and looked at the woman standing in front of him in hospital scrubs with gauze residue on her hands, and a name tag that said Morrow, C, and said nothing for a moment because there was apparently nothing immediately adequate to say. Claire looked at him. Her expression hadn't changed, but something behind it had. A door she'd kept shut for 3 years had just been knocked off its hinges by 4 words on a military radio frequency, and the particular stillness on her face was the stillness of someone deciding very quickly how to manage that. "How current is that record?" she asked. "Flagged this morning," Valdez said. 40 minutes ago. Someone ran a secondary query on your employment credentials through the hospital's federal filing system, and it triggered the seal." He paused. "Someone at this hospital tried to look you up through official channels." "Fitch," she said. "I don't know who." "I do." She looked toward the ceiling again, toward the intercom, toward the sound of Fitch's voice still moving somewhere above them. "He was going to pull my credentials before the end of his sentence. That's how he works." She exhaled through her nose. "Who gets the notification when a sealed record gets triggered?" Valdez's jaw shifted. "My command. And whoever sealed it. Which means somebody above my pay grade already knows this happened." He studied her. "Captain, don't." Her voice was flat. Not hostile, just final. "I'm not that anymore. I'm a nurse. That's it." "With respect," Valdez said, "the U.S. Army might have a different opinion about that after this morning." She didn't answer him. She walked back to Bay 3 instead and checked on Harriet Bowman, whose oxygen sat at 94 now. Better, still not where it needed to be, but moving in the right direction. She adjusted the flow rate on the oxygen line, checked her pulse, steadier than before, and wrote the reading on the back of her own hand in marker because the chart was on the floor where it had fallen during the lockdown. Basic, procedural, the kind of task that required enough attention to keep other thoughts from moving in. It didn't entirely work. 3 years. She'd spent 3 years building a version of herself that fit inside a 12-hour shift in a studio apartment in Fort Caldwell and nothing else. And the dog had walked in this morning, and the whole architecture of it had started to crack. And now a tactical commander was standing in her ER, holding a radio that had just spoken her real name out loud for the first time since she'd filed the paperwork to change it. The 2 team members Valdez had sent to Bay 7 came back. "Guard is stable," one of them said. "Tourniquet's solid. Medics are 90 seconds out." "Good," Claire said, and didn't look up from Harriet's chart. Valdez came to stand beside her, not crowding, just present. "The commander on the line wants to speak with you." "Tell him I'm with a patient." A beat. "He's a general, ma'am." "I know what generals are." She finally looked up. "Tell him I'm with a patient. He can wait 3 minutes, or he can find someone else to talk to." Valdez looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't quite categorize. Not quite respect, not quite disbelief, somewhere in the middle. And then he keyed his radio and said, "She's with a patient, sir. She'll be available shortly." The general, apparently, waited. The medics came in through the trauma bay doors with 2 gurneys and the focused efficiency of people who'd been told the scene was secure and were there to move fast. Claire briefed them on Kowalski first, tourniquet time, estimated blood loss, no loss of consciousness. Then on Daniel Garrett, who had not moved from the floor of Bay 5 and whose hands were still visible and still empty. One of the medics, a woman named Tran, who had clearly done this before, looked at Claire's improvised bandaging on Garrett's arm and said, "This yours?" "Yeah." "Good pack job." She was already cutting it to reassess. "You have field training?" "Some," Claire said. Tran glanced up at her with the brief evaluating look of someone filing information away and then went back to work. And Claire felt the word "some" sit in the air between them like something with weight. She moved toward the exit. Valdez fell into step beside her without being asked, which told her he'd been trained in a specific kind of situational awareness that wasn't just tactical. "The general is still on the line." "I know." She pushed through the door into the main hospital corridor and stopped. The corridor was not empty. Hospital administration had apparently decided that secure meant they could come out, which was a decision made about 4 minutes too early, but wasn't worth arguing about now. There were 3 people she didn't know in suits, 2 board members she recognized by face, and Douglas Fitch, who was standing 20 feet away with his phone in his hand and an expression that cycled rapidly through surprise, reassessment, and something that was trying to look like authority but wasn't quite getting there. Nurse Morrow. He said it the way people said things they intended to be recorded. "You violated lockdown protocol. You entered an active threat situation without authorization. You endangered yourself and potentially worsened. 3 patients stabilized," Claire said. 1 guard with a tourniquet that's holding. 1 shooter in custody without additional force. She looked at him steadily. "You want to tell me what the outcome looks like without any of that?" "That is not the point. It's exactly the point. She hadn't raised her voice. There was no need to. The corridor was quiet enough that everyone present could hear a normal speaking volume, which was its own kind of pressure. The point is that people were in those bays bleeding, and 12 minutes is a long time when you're bleeding. I made a decision based on what I know how to do. If you want to have a conversation about protocol, I'm available after I've slept 4 hours. You're suspended, Fitch said. Effective immediately. Badge on the desk. She unclipped her badge, looked at it for a moment, set it on the nearest horizontal surface, which was the top of an emergency phone mounted to the wall, and walked toward the exit. She was 6 feet from the door when Marcus appeared from somewhere to her left, slightly out of breath. Claire, wait. They're saying you went in there alone, that you... I heard Kowalski was... He's okay, she said. They've got him. You can't just leave. Fitch is talking about criminal liability for the lockdown breach. He can talk, she said. I'm going to my car. And then what? She thought about the radio, about the 4 words, about the dog in the lobby that she hadn't seen in years but that had crawled to her across a polished floor like it was the most natural thing in the world. I don't know yet, she said, which was honest, and pushed the door open. She made it to the second level of the parking structure before Valdez caught up with her. He was faster than he looked, and he'd taken the stairs, which meant he'd anticipated her route, which meant he was paying a specific kind of attention. She didn't break stride. I'm not under arrest, she said. No, ma'am. Then why are you following me to my car? Because the general isn't on the radio anymore, Valdez said, keeping pace. He's in a vehicle about 8 minutes from this location, and he asked me to make sure you were available for a conversation. She stopped at her car, a 9-year-old gray Civic with a cracked side mirror she'd been meaning to replace since February, and turned to face him. What general? Valdez was quiet for exactly long enough to tell her the name was meaningful. General Harlan Briggs, out of Peterson. She stared at him. Briggs. Harlan Briggs, who had been a colonel when she last saw him, sitting across from her in a room in Kandahar, with a folder on the table between them and a very specific expression on his face that she'd spent the better part of 3 years not thinking about. Why is Briggs in Nevada? She asked. He's been in Nevada for 6 months. He took over Mountain West Medical Command in January. Valdez met her eyes. I think he's been looking for you. She got in the car. Valdez put his hand on the door before she could close it. Not forceful, just present. Ma'am. Captain Carter. Claire, she said. My name is Claire. Claire. He adjusted. The general isn't the only one coming. When that flag triggered on your record, it generated a notification to the Inspector General's office for the Army Medical Department. That's protocol for sealed records tied to active investigations. He paused. There's an investigation that's been open for 3 years, connected to this hospital. She looked at him. Connected to patient deaths, he said. More than one. The IG's been building a case and they were missing a piece of it. He held her gaze. I don't know if you're the piece, or if you know what the piece is, but the timing of all of this... He stopped. Somebody in that hospital tried to pull your credentials this morning. Within the hour, an armed man walked in and created a situation that forced you to identify yourself. And now the IG is inbound. He let go of the door. I don't know if that's coincidence. She sat with that for a moment. It wasn't coincidence. She'd known it wasn't coincidence since the moment she'd seen the dog cross the lobby floor, though she couldn't have articulated why at the time. Just the specific unease of things converging that had been moving toward each other for a long time. The patient deaths, she said. The IG's case. Do you have any details? Not my clearance level, but the JAG officer who called my command mentioned a name. He looked at her carefully. Miles Garrett. The name sat in the air between them. Daniel Garrett on the floor of Bay 5, his hand pressed over a gun he hadn't picked back up. He came in with appendicitis. Went in at 10 in the morning. They said it was routine. She got out of the car. Briggs arrived in a black government SUV with 2 aides and no fanfare, which was exactly how Briggs had always operated. He was 62 now, heavier than she remembered, with the careful movements of someone managing a bad knee, but his eyes were the same. The particular sharp patience of a man who was very good at waiting for the right moment and very good at acting when it came. He found her in the hospital's ground-level conference room, which Valdez had commandeered from administration with a brevity that suggested he'd done similar things before. Fitch had tried to object and had been shown a set of federal credentials that apparently resolved the objection. Briggs walked in, assessed the room, looked at her. "You look tired," he said. "I've been on shift since yesterday evening," she said. "Sir?" He sat down across from her. His aide stayed outside. Valdez stood near the door at a distance that was technically in the room, but functionally not in the conversation. "I'm going to talk fast," Briggs said, "because I expect we have about 20 minutes before this building gets very complicated." "Then talk." He put a manila folder on the table. Not thick, maybe 15 pages, but worn at the corners in the way files got worn when they'd been handled a lot. Hargrove Medical Center has been under investigation by the Army Medical Inspector General for 31 months. The trigger was a complaint filed by a former employee who alleged that critically ill patients were being deliberately underclassified in the ER triage system to reduce admission numbers and improve financial metrics. He tapped the folder. When those patients didn't get admitted, some of them didn't survive. She looked at the folder. "How many?" "Confirmed, 4. Suspected, more. The records have been altered. The IG has partial documentation, but the electronic patient management system was wiped and reinstalled 16 months ago. Selectively. Some records survived, most didn't." He paused. Miles Garrett was one of the confirmed cases. 17 years old. Admitted through the ER, triaged at a lower acuity than his presentation warranted. Sent to a lower priority surgical queue. By the time they got to him, the appendix had ruptured and the infection was systemic. She didn't say anything. "Daniel Garrett filed records requests for 14 months, Briggs said. Every one of them was intercepted and either denied or returned sanitized. He filed a complaint with the state medical board. The complaint was received, logged, and then buried under a procedural hold that was renewed every 90 days by someone with access to the board's administrative system." He finally looked up. His complaint never reached a single reviewer for 14 months. "Who intercepted it?" she said. "Not a question, really. We have documentation pointing to Fitch and at least 2 members of the hospital's quality assurance department, possibly the CEO, Hartwell. We're still building that piece." He leaned forward slightly. "This morning, someone in Fitch's office ran a federal employment verification on your credentials. It wasn't routine. It was a specific search using a protocol that only gets used when someone is trying to confirm or deny a classified work history." She processed that. "He knew who I was. He knew your name had a flag on it. We believe he's known for some time, possibly since you were hired. Hargrove hired you 3 years ago, which is the same window in which the IG investigation became active. We think someone on the board had the record pulled early and decided that having a former Army combat nurse in the ER was either a liability or an asset, and then watched to see which way it fell." She felt something cold move through her that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite anger. "They hired me to watch me. That's our working theory." He sat back. "What we don't know is why this morning. Why trigger the credential search now, in the middle of a PR event, with cameras present?" "Because of the dog," she said. Briggs looked at her. "Rico recognized me, in front of everyone. The board, the news crew, the Army personnel. Fitch saw it. Whatever he thought he knew about me, seeing the dog react that way told him something was about to come apart, and he panicked." She pressed her thumbnail against the inside of her wrist, the reset, the anchor. "He was trying to confirm whether I was still classified before he moved against me. He needed to know what he was dealing with." Briggs was quiet for a moment. "That dog," he said. "Sergeant Alvarez's animal." "Rico, yes." "You know that dog." She looked at the table, at the worn corners of the folder. "We were in Logar province 2 years before I came here. A convoy got hit, the handler was down, the dog was injured. I was the senior medical officer on scene." She paused. "The dog didn't leave the handler's side while I worked on him. I had to keep talking to the dog to keep him from interfering. I was sitting on my feet by the time I finished." She exhaled. "I didn't know they were going to be here this morning." "Alvarez requested the community outreach assignment 3 weeks ago," Briggs said. "He asked specifically for Fort Caldwell. He told his CO he had family in the area." He watched her. "He doesn't have family in Nevada." She looked up. "Alvarez has been searching for you for 2 years, Briggs said. His handler, Lieutenant Cole, the one you worked on in Logar. He died 8 months after you came here. Infection, complications from the original injury." Alvarez was there. And when Cole died, he said the only person he talked about from that day was the nurse who kept talking to the dog. He paused. Alvarez has been trying to find that nurse ever since. The room was very quiet. She was aware of Valdez near the door, staying carefully still. She was aware of the fluorescent light above the table that buzzed at a frequency just below what most people noticed, but that she'd clocked within 30 seconds of sitting down. She was aware that her hands, flat on the table in front of her, were not entirely steady, which was not something she was used to. Cole, she said. His name was Aaron Cole. You remember him. I remember all of them. She said it without drama, because it wasn't dramatic, it was just true. You remember all of them. Briggs let that sit. He didn't try to move past it or around it, which was one of the things she'd always respected about him. He knew when something needed to stay in the room for a moment. Then he opened the folder. I need you to look at something, he said. He slid a single page across the table. It was a printout. Employment record, partially redacted. But the dates were visible, and the department designations were visible, and the name at the top was not redacted. The name was hers. The real one. Claire Carter. And the employment start date at Hargrove Medical Center wasn't 3 years ago. It was 4 years ago. She stared at the page. This is wrong. That's what our records show. I wasn't here 4 years ago. I was still active. I was still... She stopped. Read the date again. The department listed was quality assurance, not emergency medicine. The supervisor listed was someone named Rourke, who she'd never heard of. I've never worked in QA. I've never met anyone named Rourke. This record is fabricated. We know, Briggs said. Someone inserted a false employment record for your name, your real name, your service number, into this hospital's federal contractor filing system 4 years ago, before you actually came here, before the IG investigation started. He folded his hands. That record has your name on a QA sign-off for patient triage classifications, including Miles Garrett's. The cold thing moved through her again, sharper this time. They framed me, she said, contingently. They built the frame and left it in place. If the IG ever got close enough to need a name, there was a name already in the system, a classified name that would be difficult to investigate because the record was sealed. He met her eyes. You were their exit. She sat with that. With the specific quality of it, the patience required, the premeditation, someone 3 or 4 years ago deciding that a sealed Army record made a perfect thing to hide behind because sealed records were hard to pull and easy to point at. Fitch, she said, we believe so. We're still mapping the chain. He closed the folder. Claire, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight. Okay? In 3 years here, working in this ER, did you see anything, document anything? Did anything happen that you flagged internally or reported through any channel? She was quiet for a moment, not because she didn't know the answer, because she knew exactly what the answer was, and she was aware of what it meant. 14 months ago, she said, I filed an internal quality concern, a pediatric case. 17-year-old male, appendicitis presentation, triaged as a lower acuity than I assessed him to be. He went to the routine surgical queue. I disagreed with the classification. I submitted the concern through the electronic system and sent a physical copy to the department supervisor. She paused. I never heard back. I followed up twice. Both times I was told the case had been reviewed and the classification was appropriate. Briggs had gone very still. The patient's name, he said. I didn't have access to his name. The internal concern system was anonymized for legal reasons. She looked at him. But I have my copy of the submission. I saved a printed copy. I have it at home. For the first time since he'd walked in, something moved across Briggs's face that wasn't pure controlled professionalism. Something that looked almost like relief and almost like anger, and was probably both. Claire, he said, that document. The door opened. Valdez took half a step forward. Sir, we have a situation. I'm aware we have several. No, sir. New situation. He held the door, and through it came the sound of voices, multiple, loud, moving fast. Hospital CEO is in the lobby. He's with legal counsel. They're requesting federal credentials from our team, and they're recording the interaction. A pause. And there's a news crew that didn't leave when they were supposed to. They're still here. They've been filming since the lockdown started. Briggs stood. Claire stood. Through the door, down the hallway, Douglas Fitch's voice cut through everything else, louder than it needed to be. Calibrated for cameras. This hospital has been subjected to unauthorized military interference in a civilian medical facility, and we will be filing. We need your document, Briggs said to her, quiet and direct. How fast can you get home and back? 20 minutes, she said. Valdez will drive you. He picked up the folder. And Claire, he stopped her at the door. Don't talk to anyone on the way out. Not the crew. Not administration. Not anyone. She nodded. And for what it's worth, he said, I've been trying to find you for 2 years also. She looked at him for a moment, then she went through the door. The hallway was louder now, the kind of loud that happened when a situation passed the point of containment and became something else. Voices overlapping, the flat white light of a news camera somewhere to her left. Fitch's voice still going. Executives clustered in 3s and 4s doing the specific thing people did when they knew something was falling and were trying to decide which side to land on. She walked straight through it. Nobody stopped her. One of Fitch's aides tried to step into her path and she walked around him without breaking stride, and he apparently decided that was not a confrontation worth starting. She was almost to the main exit when she passed the lobby. Rico was still there. Sergeant Alvarez was sitting on a bench near the entrance, the dog at his feet, and when she walked by, Rico lifted his head and tracked her with the attentive certainty of an animal that had located something important and was not planning to lose it again. Alvarez looked up. His face was younger than she remembered, or maybe she just hadn't looked at it directly before. He had the specific expression of someone who had been carrying something for a long time and had just seen a place to set it down. She stopped. You requested Fort Caldwell, she said. He nodded. You've been here 3 weeks. Yes, ma'am. She looked at Rico. Rico looked back with the dark, steady attention of an animal that understood more than was convenient to explain. Aaron Cole, she said. Alvarez's jaw tightened once. He talked about you. After Logar. Every time things got bad, he'd talk about the nurse who kept telling Rico it was going to be okay. He paused. He said you were the reason Rico didn't try to follow him when they finally got him to surgery. You convinced the dog to wait. She didn't say anything. He died in March, Alvarez said. 2 years ago, March. I know, she said. I heard. She hadn't told anyone how she'd heard, because it would have required explaining things she wasn't supposed to explain. But she'd heard. Alvarez looked down at Rico. I just wanted you to know that somebody remembered. It was the kind of thing that, if she'd been less tired or less wrung out from the last 3 hours, might have hit differently. As it was, it went somewhere specific and quiet, and she let it. Thank you, she said. Not performed, just direct. She was at the door when Alvarez said, Ma'am, what's going to happen now? She thought about the folder, about the false employment record with her name on it, about Daniel Garrett on the floor of Bay 5 and a 14-month-old complaint buried under procedural holds, and a 17-year-old who'd gone in for routine surgery and not come out. I don't know yet, she said, but I know what's in my filing cabinet at home, and I think that's going to change the question. She pushed through the door into the parking structure, and Valdez was already pulling the SUV around, and somewhere behind her inside Hargrove Medical Center, something that had been held in place for 4 years was beginning, slowly, with the specific momentum of things that start small and become impossible to stop, to move. The document was in a manila envelope in the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, behind her lease agreement and a folder of pay stubs she'd kept out of habit and never looked at. She'd printed it the same day she filed it, not because she'd expected trouble, but because she'd been trained to keep physical copies of things that mattered. And 14 months ago, something about the triage classification on that pediatric case had sat wrong in her chest in a way she couldn't entirely rationalize. She'd submitted the concern electronically, printed the confirmation, printed her own notes, stapled them together, and put them in the drawer. She hadn't looked at them since. Valdez waited in the SUV downstairs. She'd told him 5 minutes, and she meant it. She found the envelope on the first try, pulled it without sitting down, and was back at the door in under 4 minutes. She stopped once, at the kitchen counter, and drank a full glass of water because she hadn't had anything since the coffee she'd finished at 3 in the morning, and her hands were starting to have the specific unsteadiness that came from caffeine drop and no food, and sustained adrenaline. and she needed them steadier than that. She looked at the envelope in her hand. 14 months sitting in a drawer. A document she'd filed through the correct channel, been told twice was resolved, and never thought about again. Not because she'd stopped caring, but because the system had told her it was handled, and she had 16 other patients that week, and the week after that, and the week after that. That was how it worked. That was how it always worked. You flagged something, the system absorbed it, and you moved on because if you didn't move on, you couldn't function, and if you couldn't function, people died. Except sometimes the system didn't absorb it. Sometimes the system buried it. She went back downstairs. Briggs was on the phone when they got back to the hospital, standing in the corridor outside the conference room with his back to the wall and the particular posture of someone receiving information. They're processing faster than the person on the other end realizes. He held up 2 fingers when she came in. 2 minutes, and she went past him into the conference room. There were more people in it now, a woman she didn't recognize, 50s, civilian clothes, but with the specific economy of movement that came from federal employment, sat at the end of the table with a laptop and a legal pad covered in notes. 2 men she also didn't recognize were standing near the window going through a stack of printed documents. None of them looked up when she came in. She put the envelope on the table. The woman looked up then. Her eyes went to the envelope, then to Claire. "You're Morrow." "Claire," she said, same as she'd told Valdez. "Special Agent Diane Okafor, Army Inspector General." She stood, extended a hand, shook briefly. "The envelope." "My copy of an internal quality concern I filed 14 months ago, pediatric triage case. I can walk you through the clinical details." "I want everything." Okafor sat back down, pulled the envelope toward her, and opened it with the careful efficiency of someone who understood that what was inside it might need to hold up in a federal proceeding. She read the top page, then the second, and her expression didn't change, but something behind it sharpened in a way Claire recognized from people who'd just found the piece they'd been looking for. "The case number on this form," Okafor said. "You know what that is?" "My internal submission number. It was assigned by the electronic system when I filed. This number corresponds to a case in our partial records that was flagged as administratively closed with no review." Okafor turned the page around and pointed to a line of text. "This notation here, 3 initials, DF. Do you know whose those are?" Claire looked at the initials. "Douglas Fitch. He signed off on a case closure that should have required a physician review board to close. He doesn't have that authority." Okafor turned the page back. "But he had system access, and apparently nobody looked closely enough at who was closing what." She looked at Claire. "This is the first physical documentation we've found that ties Fitch directly to a specific case suppression. Everything else was electronic, and the audit trail was wiped when the system was reinstalled." "You said 4 confirmed deaths," Claire said. "Miles Garrett was one. What about the other 3? 2 cardiac presentations, triaged at lower acuity than the clinical picture supported. 1 post-surgical complication that should have triggered an immediate escalation protocol and didn't." Okafor's voice was level. "All 3 had quality concerns filed by ER staff. All 3 were closed by Fitch or someone acting under his authority within 72 hours. None of them received a physician review." Briggs came in from the corridor, phone in his pocket, jaw set in the way it got when he was managing several things at once. "We have a problem." "Which one?" Claire said. "Fitch's legal counsel filed an emergency injunction 40 minutes ago to block federal investigators from accessing patient records. They're claiming HIPAA protection as a shield." He pulled out a chair and sat. "The judge they drew is reviewing it now. If he grants a temporary hold, we lose access to the records until it's litigated, which could be months." "He has records that aren't in the electronic system," Claire said. Everyone in the room looked at her. She hadn't planned to say it. She'd been sitting with it since the conversation in the conference room. The thing she hadn't been sure was relevant until Okafor said audit trail wiped when the system was reinstalled. When the system was reinstalled 16 months ago, the hospital transitioned to a new electronic platform. During the transition, there was a 90-day window where patient records were maintained in parallel, paper and electronic. Standard protocol for major system migrations. She looked at Okafor. "I know because I was the ER liaison for the transition. I attended the implementation meetings. And I know that the Quality Assurance Department was supposed to archive the parallel period paper files in a bonded storage facility per state medical records regulations. Supposed to, Briggs said. The QA director at the time was a man named Rourke. She paused on the name, watched Okafor write it down. He handled the physical archive. I signed off on the ER portion of the transition log. Rourke signed off on QA. She pressed her thumbnail against her wrist. His signature on the archive log means he took physical possession of those files. If they still exist, they're either in the bonded storage facility or he kept them, Okafor said flatly. He or someone above him. The parallel period files would cover the Miles Garrett case and at least 2 of the cardiac presentations. If those records show the original triage classifications before they were altered in the electronic system. They blow the case wide open, Briggs said. Yes. The room was quiet for a moment, in the specific way rooms got quiet when several people were simultaneously recalculating. One of the men by the window said, without looking up from his documents, Rourke left Hargrove 8 months ago, moved to Arizona. We have an address. Get someone to it, Okafor said. Now, before anyone calls him. She looked at Claire. Is there anything else you know about the transition period that we should know? Claire thought about it. Thought about the implementation meetings, the stacks of paper, Rourke's careful organizational habits. He'd been almost compulsive about documentation, which she'd found annoying at the time, and now understood was either genuine or very deliberately cultivated as cover. He used a specific bonded storage company. Vaultline Records, they're based in Henderson. The contract number should be on the archive log, and the archive log should be in the hospital's vendor records. Okafor wrote it down, underlined it, looked up. How do you know the contract number would still be in vendor records if the electronic system was wiped? Vendor contracts are maintained separately from patient records. Different system, different administrator. Finance, not clinical. She paused. And I know because I spent 3 hours in an implementation meeting listening to the CFO explain exactly why vendor contracts were going to stay on the legacy system for an additional 18 months while the rest of us transitioned. He was very thorough about it. Okafor looked at her for a moment with an expression that was as close to warmth as someone in the middle of a federal investigation probably allowed themselves. You paid attention in a lot of meetings most people would have slept through. Don't sleep through things, Claire said. It's a problem sometimes. The injunction was denied at 11:47, which Briggs got word of via a call that lasted 30 seconds and ended with him saying good and hanging up with the specific satisfaction of someone who'd expected it but was glad to have it confirmed. The judge had apparently found the HIPAA argument pretextual, given that the federal investigation predated the current records request by over 2 years. Fitch's attorney, according to the aide who relayed the update, was now on the phone with the hospital's board chair. The board chair, according to the same aide, had not returned 3 calls from the CEO that morning. Claire registered these developments from the corner of the conference room where she'd been sitting for the last 40 minutes, going through a second set of documents Okafor had placed in front of her. Staffing records, shift logs from the ER going back 4 years, with certain entries circled in red marker. She was confirming which shifts she'd worked, which supervisors had been on duty, building the documentary record of her actual presence at the hospital against the falsified QA record that had her there a year before she'd applied. It was meticulous, tedious work, and she was running on no sleep and 1 glass of water and whatever was left of the adrenaline from the morning, which was starting to have a specific unpleasant quality. The backside of it, the part that felt like cotton behind the eyes, and a low-grade ache in the base of the skull. Marcus texted at 11:52. The message said, "They're saying Kowalski is going to be okay. Femur's intact, just soft tissue. Thought you'd want to know." She wrote back, "Good, thank you." He wrote, "Also Fitch told the board you endangered patients by entering the ER during lockdown." She looked at that for a moment. Then she put her phone face down on the table and went back to the staffing records. Briggs appeared at her shoulder 20 minutes later. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at the stack of documents she'd been working through. Then, "You should eat something." "I'm fine." "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't slept." She turned a page. "What's happening with Daniel Garrett?" "In custody, medical hold. His attorney is already making noises about the record suppression as a mitigating factor for the shooting." Briggs pulled out the chair next to her and sat. "Okafor's team is going to want to interview him. His testimony about the records requests, The specific denials, the dates, the names on the correspondence could be significant. He kept everything, she said. You could hear it in the way he talked about it. 14 months of documentation. He's the kind of person who holds on to paper. She looked up. Make sure his attorney knows what we found this morning, about the complaint that was buried. He deserves to know that somebody else saw it too. Briggs looked at her. That's not exactly standard procedure. No, she agreed. But he came in here with a gun because 14 months of doing things the right way got him nowhere. The least we can do is tell him that it wasn't because nobody saw it. It was because someone actively made sure it disappeared. She held Briggs's gaze. That's a different thing. It doesn't change what he did, but it's a different thing. He was quiet for a moment. I'll pass it to the JAG officer. The door opened. Okafor came in, and behind her was a man Claire hadn't seen yet, tall, thin, in his 40s, with the slightly rumpled look of someone who'd been pulled into a vehicle in a hurry. He was carrying a box. Not a file box. A banker's box. The kind with a removable lid, and the lid was not on it, and from where Claire sat she could see paper inside it. Actual paper, stacked in folders. The top one labeled in handwriting she didn't recognize. This is Agent Pryor, Okafor said, in a tone that did not require additional context. He's been in Henderson. Vault line, Claire said. Vault line. Okafor set the box on the conference table. The contract was active. The archive was intact. Nobody had accessed it since it was deposited. She looked at Claire. Rourke filed the archive and apparently decided the best thing to do with whatever he knew was nothing, which is not a good look for him, but it means the files weren't destroyed. How complete? 90-day transition period, full parallel record. Every patient who came through this ER. She opened the top folder. Including a 17-year-old male presenting with acute abdominal pain and fever, admitted through ER triage on a Tuesday morning, 14 months ago. She held it out. Claire took it. The original triage assessment was on the second page, handwritten by the triage nurse on duty. A name Claire recognized, someone who'd left Hargrove 6 months ago, which now felt less like coincidence. The clinical picture was laid out in straightforward nursing shorthand. Fever, 38.9. Rebound tenderness, guarding, elevated white count from the rapid lab panel, pain scale 8. Patient unable to straighten fully due to abdominal rigidity. Beside the handwritten assessment, in a different pen, someone had written a lower acuity code, then crossed it out, then written the lower code again with initials beside it. The initials were not DF, they were KH. She stared at the initials. Hartwell, Briggs said from behind her. He'd come to look. The CEO's initials are KH. Kevin Hartwell, Okafor confirmed. Her voice had gone very flat in the way that happened when something significant landed. He personally reclassified the triage on Miles Garrett. The room went quiet again, different from before, less recalculating, more absorbing. The kind of quiet that happened when the thing you thought was a middle management cover-up turned out to go one level higher than that. Claire looked at the crossed-out acuity code, at the handwriting above it, careful, detailed, accurate. At the handwriting that replaced it, quick, almost dismissive, the pen pressed hard like someone writing under irritation. A 17-year-old had come in with every clinical sign of a surgical emergency, and the chief executive of the hospital had downgraded his care priority in his own handwriting. Why? She said. Not to anyone in particular, just out loud, because it needed to be said out loud. Financial performance targets, Okafor said. Surgical Q metrics. If your ER admission numbers exceed a certain threshold, you get flagged for review by the insurance consortium. If you get flagged, your reimbursement rates get audited. If your rates get audited, she stopped. It's a cascade. The short version is that admitting fewer patients, even critical ones, kept the hospital in a lower risk tier for reimbursements. And in the quarter that Miles Garrett came in, there were 6 admissions over the threshold. 6 admissions, Claire said. 6. She put the folder down. She was aware that her hands had gone very still, which happened sometimes when she was managing something that would have been better managed by breaking a window, but breaking windows wasn't useful. There are more in that box, Pryor said. He was standing to the side watching her. 12 other cases from that 90-day window with the same pattern. Handwriting analysis is going to take time, but at least 4 of them have the same initials. Get a handwriting examiner in today, Okafor said. Don't wait. She looked at her phone. I have a call with the U.S. Attorney's Office in 6 minutes. She stood. Claire, I need you available for the next 2 hours. Can you do that? Yes, she said. Good. Okafor picked up her legal pad. She stopped at the door. For what it's worth, the complaint you filed 14 months ago. The one that was buried. It's the only contemporaneous clinical documentation we have from an ER provider on the Garrett case. Everything else is administrative. She paused. You were the only person in this building who put it in writing at the time. She went out. Briggs stood. Pryor took the box to the other side of the room and began going through it with a second agent who'd appeared at some point, and the room reorganized itself around the work, the particular purposeful quiet of a case gaining momentum. Claire looked at the original triage note again, at the careful handwriting of a nurse who'd done exactly what she was trained to do, at the second handwriting, quick and dismissive, undoing it. She thought about what it would mean to work in a building where that happened and not know it was happening, where you filed a concern and were told it was handled and went back to your shift, and in a drawer somewhere, the evidence of your concern was sitting next to the evidence of why it had been suppressed, and the two things never found each other for 14 months. The door opened again. Valdez leaned in. He had the specific look of someone about to deliver information they'd already decided was going to complicate things. We have a situation outside. You keep saying that, Claire said. It keeps being true. He looked at Briggs. News crew that didn't leave this morning. They've been filing updates all day. Hospital's attorney tried to get an injunction on the footage and it got denied 20 minutes ago, same time as the records injunction. The footage is going out on the regional affiliate at noon. He paused. It includes the lobby footage from this morning, the dog. And it includes Fitch calling for Morrow to be removed and suspended. He paused again. And it includes her going through the lockdown doors. Briggs looked at the clock on the wall. What time is it? 11:58, Valdez said. So, in 2 minutes. Yes, sir. Briggs looked at Claire. Claire looked at the folder in front of her. It doesn't change anything, she said. No, Briggs agreed, but it changes the audience. By 12:30, the story had been picked up by 2 national feeds. By 1 o'clock, Okafor's office had received 43 calls, media requests, former employee tips, 3 attorneys representing current and former Hargrove staff who had been waiting for something that looked like a safe moment to come forward. Claire knew about this second and third hand through Briggs and Valdez because she had been in a room with a federal stenographer for most of it, giving a formal statement that took 90 minutes and covered the triage classification system, the transition period, the quality concern she'd filed, the 2 follow-up inquiries that had been shut down, and her employment history in enough detail to establish the complete falsity of the record that had her name on a QA sign-off 4 years ago. The stenographer was professional and neutral and efficient. She transcribed everything without visible reaction, which was the correct approach, but meant that the room had a particular absence of human response that made the whole process feel like dropping stones into still water. Accurate, complete, and entirely alone. Claire's voice was steady throughout. She'd gotten good at that. The flat professional delivery, the precise recall, the clinical detachment from the emotional content of what she was describing. She'd learned it in Logar and Kandahar and a dozen other places where losing your composure was a tactical liability. She'd kept it here, in a conference room in a civilian hospital in Fort Caldwell, Nevada, describing the burial of a dead teenager's medical record. She stumbled once, just once, on the word routine. They said it was routine. Daniel Garrett's voice, on the floor of Bay 5. He went in at 10 in the morning. She stopped for 3 seconds, pressed her thumbnail against her wrist, continued. The stenographer did not react. When it was done, Claire sat in the empty room for 4 minutes before she stood up. It wasn't collapse. She wasn't that tired. Not yet. It was more like the specific pause that happened after something had been said out loud that had been unsaid for a long time and needed a moment before you moved on. She stood. She went to find Briggs. She found him in the corridor with Okafor and 2 men she didn't recognize, all of them looking at a laptop screen. She came up behind them and saw what was on it. A video. Paused. Lobby footage time-stamped 7:14 that morning. Rico, mid-crawl, belly to the floor, moving toward the edge of the frame where she'd been standing. This has 400,000 views, Okafor said. Not to her, to the room. It'll be 2 million by morning, one of the men said, which means Hartwell's picture is on every regional broadcast in the Mountain West, Briggs said. He looked at Claire. How are you doing? I've been better, she said, which was honest. What's happening? Hartwell hasn't left the building. His attorney advised him not to. He's been in his office for the last 2 hours. Briggs closed the laptop. Fitch, on the other hand, requested a federal escort off the premises because there are apparently 17 journalists in the parking structure and he's afraid of them. Did he get it? No. Good. She looked down the corridor toward the ER. Are they still running? The ER? Skeleton crew. Admin pulled half the staff for individual interviews with my legal team, which is going to be a problem when the afternoon shift changes. He paused. You're not authorized to be in there. You're suspended. I know. She looked at the ER doors. Through the glass, she could see 2 nurses she knew working a board that was filling up fast. And one of them, Torres, a travel nurse who'd been there 6 weeks and was good, but was clearly maxing out, had the specific posture of someone who was 3 tasks behind and getting further behind every minute. I know I'm suspended, she said again. Briggs looked at her. Claire, I see what's happening in there. I know what you see. And I'm telling you that if you go in there right now and something goes wrong, it becomes a liability for the federal case. His voice was not unkind. Your suspension is on paper. If you override it today, Fitch's attorney will use it. She looked at Torres through the glass. Torres was trying to manage 2 patients simultaneously and missing something on the chart of the third, which Claire could see from the corridor because she'd been reading charts from angles for 12 years. She stayed in the corridor. It cost her something to stay in the corridor. The vault line files, she said. Have you found more cases? Pryor's team has identified 6 additional triage cases from the transition period with irregularities. Hartwell's initials are on 2 more. 3 others have initials they haven't matched yet, possibly Fitch, possibly someone in QA. He paused. 6 cases, 4 confirmed deaths. If the remaining cases produce similar outcomes, we're looking at potentially 8 to 10 preventable deaths across a 4-year period. She absorbed that. 8 to 10 preventable deaths. Not as an abstraction, as individual people who came in through those doors the same way Harriet Bowman had come in, the same way Miles Garrett had come in, and had their care deprioritized by someone who was managing a spreadsheet instead of a hospital. One of the nurses who filed the concern on one of the cardiac cases, Okafor said, coming to join them. She moved to Oregon 2 years ago. We reached her this morning. She said she was let go from Hargrove after she filed the concern. A pause. She was told it was a budget reduction. We're pulling the termination records. They fired people who filed concerns, Claire said. That's the pattern we're building. Okafor looked at her clipboard. Which makes your employment history interesting from a different angle. You filed a concern and they didn't fire you. They left you in place. Because of the classified record, Claire said. Fitch knew my name had a flag. He couldn't fire me without potentially drawing attention to the flag. So he buried the concern and kept me where he could watch me. That's what we think, Okafor said, which means he spent 3 years managing you rather than removing you. And this morning the dog blew that calculation completely apart. Claire thought about Rico, crawling across the lobby floor. A dog following a scent it had been holding for 3 years, across a continent, into a hospital lobby at exactly the wrong moment for Douglas Fitch. The wrong moment, or the right one. Okafor's phone rang. She looked at it, and her expression shifted. The specific shift of someone receiving information that requires a fast decision. She stepped away to take the call. Claire looked at Briggs. What? Her expression. I saw it. He was watching Okafor too. Could be anything. Okafor came back 30 seconds later. Her face had settled into something deliberate. The Arizona team reached Rourke. And, Briggs said, he talked. She looked at the laptop, at the paused lobby footage on the screen. He says Hartwell gave him the physical files personally after the system migration, told him to deposit them at Vaultline and then forget they existed. She paused. He also says Hartwell has a second set. The corridor went very quiet. A second set, Briggs said. Hartwell kept duplicates of the most sensitive cases. Personal insurance. Rourke doesn't know where they are. He thinks they're in Hartwell's office or his residence. But he says Hartwell told him once, during the migration, that he never moved paper without keeping a copy. She looked at Claire. If Hartwell has copies of the original triage records, including his own annotations, we need them before he destroys them. Briggs was already moving. Get a warrant. Working on it. 40 minutes, maybe less. Okafor looked at her phone again. But Hartwell's attorney just walked into his office 12 minutes ago. 40 minutes. An attorney already in the room. Claire looked down the corridor, past the ER doors, past the lobby, toward the administrative wing where Hartwell's office occupied the corner of the second floor, which she knew because she'd been to it exactly twice, once for an onboarding meeting 3 years ago, and once for what had been described to her as a routine check-in that she now understood had been anything but routine. The second-floor administrative wing had one corridor access from the main hospital and one from the exterior parking structure stairwell. She knew this because she used the stairwell sometimes to get to the break room on the second floor, which had better coffee than the one on the ground level. She looked at Briggs. He looked at her. She could see him already knowing what she was thinking and already starting to calculate whether he was going to be able to stop her. "I'm not going to his office," she said. "Good. I'm going to the second-floor break room to get coffee." She paused. "Because I've been awake for 30 hours and nobody has offered me anything." "Claire, I'm suspended from clinical duties. I'm not suspended from the building." She held his gaze. "I'm going to the break room, which is 30 feet from the administrative wing, and I'm going to drink coffee. That's all." Briggs looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man who understood exactly what was happening and was making a decision about whether to stop it. "Stop it. Valdez," he said, without looking away from her. "Sir," Valdez said from somewhere behind her. "Go with her. To the break room." His tone was very measured. "Make sure she gets her coffee safely." "Yes, sir." She turned and walked toward the stairwell. She was on the second-floor landing, Valdez 2 steps behind her, when she heard it, from the corridor ahead, from the direction of the administrative wing, a sound she had not expected and that stopped her mid-step. A paper shredder, running hard, the high-sustained whine of a machine processing a lot of material very fast. And underneath it, through the door at the end of the corridor, Hartwell's voice, low, rapid, the specific cadence of someone dictating instructions under pressure. She looked at Valdez. Valdez already had his radio in his hand. Valdez had his radio up before the shredder sound finished registering. "Command, this is Valdez, second-floor administrative corridor, Hargrove Medical. We have active document destruction in progress. I need the warrant expedited. Now. Not 40 minutes. Now." He was already moving toward the administrative wing door, one hand on the radio, the other out to the side in Claire's direction. Not grabbing her, just present, the physical equivalent of "stay there." "Get Okafor up here." The response from his radio was immediate and clipped, and she couldn't make out the words, but his face told her it was moving. She stayed where she was. Not because the gesture had stopped her, but because she was thinking through the layout. The administrative wing was a single corridor with Hartwell's corner office at the far end, and 3 smaller offices between the door and it. The shredder sound was coming from the far end. Hartwell's attorney had been in there for 12 minutes. If they'd started shredding immediately when the attorney arrived, 12 minutes of high-capacity shredding was a significant volume of paper. She did the math without wanting to. "How fast does a standard crosscut process material?" she said, not really to Valdez. He glanced at her. "Depends on the machine." "A good one. Office grade, high capacity. 8 to 10 sheets per pass. Continuous feed, maybe 30 pages a minute. 30 pages a minute, 12 minutes. 360 pages minimum, potentially more if Hartwell had fed it manually and kept the machine running hot. She didn't know how many pages constituted a complete record for one patient. 15, 20, with labs and nursing notes and physician orders, call it 20. 360 pages was potentially 18 complete patient records. If he'd started the moment the attorney walked in, if the attorney had told him to. She pressed her thumbnail against her wrist. The math didn't get better. Okafor came through the stairwell door 40 seconds later at a pace that suggested she'd taken the stairs from the ground floor at something close to a run, with 2 agents behind her and her phone in her hand showing a document that was still loading. "Where?" "End of corridor," Valdez said. "Corner office, continuous operation." "How long?" 13-14 minutes now." Okafor looked at the document on her phone. "Warrant just came through. Digital copies valid for immediate execution." She looked at her agents. "Go." They went through the administrative wing door. Claire followed. Nobody told her not to. Hartwell's office door was closed. One of the agents knocked once, hard, the kind of knock that was really a statement, and said federal agents open the door, in the flat declarative way that left no interpretive space. Silence for 4 seconds. The shredder was still running. The agent tried the handle. Locked. He looked at Okafor, who looked at the warrant on her phone, who said execute, and the second agent had a master keycard from facilities. Valdez had apparently thought ahead, and the door opened. The office was large, corner windows on 2 sides, afternoon light coming in at an angle that made everything look more orderly than it was. Hartwell was standing behind his desk. He was 60, heavy through the chest, with the particular color in his face of someone whose blood pressure had been running high for the last 2 hours. His attorney, a man Claire didn't recognize, 60s, expensive suit, the specific expression of someone calculating liability in real time, was standing to his left. The shredder was a freestanding unit beside the credenza, and it was still running, and the waste bin beneath it was full. "Stop the machine," Okafor said. Hartwell's attorney said, "My client has stopped the machine or I add obstruction to the list right now." Okafor's voice didn't go up. It just became more itself, the particular flat authority of someone who was not negotiating. "I have a valid federal warrant. I'm executing it. Stop the machine." Hartwell reached over and turned it off. The room went quiet enough that Claire could hear the ventilation system and, distantly, the ambient sound of the hospital below them. Gurneys, intercoms, the ordinary machinery of a building still running in spite of everything. Okafor's agents moved immediately to the shredder, to the desk, to the credenza. The attorney started speaking again, something about scope and specificity, and Okafor handed him a physical copy of the warrant, printed by someone downstairs, and said, "Read it," in a tone that ended the sentence. Claire stood near the door and watched Hartwell. He hadn't looked at her directly yet. He was watching Okafor's agents move through his office with the expression of someone watching a structural collapse in slow motion, unable to stop it, still somehow surprised it was happening. His hands were at his sides, and they were not entirely still. Then he looked at her. She didn't look away. There was nothing particularly dramatic in the look she gave him. No satisfaction, no anger, none of the things she might have been entitled to. Just the direct level attention of someone who had spent 3 years in his building and wanted him to understand that she saw him clearly and had seen him clearly for some time. He looked away first. One of the agents lifted the shredder waste bin. "This is going to forensic reconstruction," she said to Okafor. "How much can they recover?" "Crosscut?" Okafor looked at the bin. 50, 60% with time. Strip cut. Higher. "We'll see what we get." She looked at the credenza. "Open that." Hartwell's attorney said, "I object to—" "Noted," Okafor said, and the agent opened the credenza. Inside, on the left shelf, were 3 accordion files, the expandable kind, each one labeled in Hartwell's handwriting along the tab. Claire couldn't read the labels from where she was standing. She watched Okafor pull one out, open it, look at the contents for approximately 10 seconds. Okafor's expression did what it had done in the conference room with the vault line files. That specific sharpening, the controlled response of someone who had just confirmed something significant. "Bag all 3, she said. "Chain of custody from this moment." She looked at Hartwell. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm placing you under notice of arrest pending federal charging. You are not to leave this building. You are not to contact any current or former Hargrove employee. You are not— This is—" Hartwell's voice came out wrong, too high, and he stopped and reset. "This is a misunderstanding. The records you were destroying when we came through the door," Okafor said. That was routine purging of documents covered by the scope of an active federal warrant that has been on file with the court for 31 months. Okafor looked at him without inflection. "The warrant you were informed of 22 minutes ago when your attorney arrived." She paused. "That's the timeline we have." The attorney put his hand on Hartwell's arm and leaned in, and whatever he said was quiet enough that Claire didn't catch it. Hartwell's mouth closed. His color was bad. Not just the blood pressure flush anymore, something grayer under it, the pallor of someone whose body was responding to a kind of fear it hadn't expected to feel today. Claire turned and went back out into the corridor. She found the break room where she'd said she was going and made herself a cup of coffee from the machine in the corner, which was the same brand they had on the ground floor, but the beans in this one were less burnt, probably because fewer people used it. She drank half of it standing at the window looking out at the parking structure, where she could see in the far corner of the lower level what appeared to be a news van that hadn't been there this morning. Make that 2 news vans. She drank the rest of the coffee. Her hands were steadier. The cotton behind the eyes was still there, but manageable. Briggs came in 7 minutes later. He poured himself coffee without asking if there was enough, which there was, and stood beside her at the window. 3 accordion files, she said. I heard. How complete? Okafor is going through them now. Early read is that Hartwell kept physical copies of every triage case he personally annotated going back 4 years. His own records, his own handwriting. Briggs drank. His attorney is currently on the phone in the corridor outside trying to locate a second attorney, which tells you something about how the first one is feeling about the situation. The shredded material. Lab will try reconstruction. Okafor says even partial recovery will be enough if the accordion files are as complete as they look. He paused. She found the Garrett record in the first file. Original triage note intact. Hartwell's annotation intact. And behind it, he stopped. She looked at him. And behind it, a memo, dated 3 weeks before Miles Garrett came in, from Hartwell to Fitch and 2 board members. Subject line is financial performance metrics, but the body of it lays out a specific protocol for triage reclassification during high-volume quarters. He let that land. It's not implicit, it's explicit. He wrote down the protocol and circulated it to at least 4 people. She set down her coffee cup. He put it in writing, she said. He put it in writing. She thought about that, about the particular arrogance required to write down the mechanism of a practice that resulted in patient deaths and then keep the document in your own office in a labeled accordion file. The arrogance of someone who had done something for long enough that it had stopped feeling like wrongdoing and had started feeling like policy. Who are the 2 board members, she said. Okafor's team is processing that. At least one of them resigned from the board 8 months ago, which may or may not be related. He finished his coffee. The other one is currently on the premises. They asked him not to leave an hour ago. He's been here all day? He was at the ceremony this morning, same as everyone else. Briggs looked at her. He watched you get suspended, watched the whole lobby situation, stayed. She thought about the board members she'd recognized by face this morning in the corridor, the ones who'd come out after lockdown was lifted. She went back through them and stopped on one, a man she'd seen twice in 4 years, tall, late 60s, always with the slight remove of someone who understood exactly where the line was between oversight and liability and was careful never to cross it in either direction. Alderman, she said. Board chair. Warren Alderman, Briggs confirmed. Yes. The second news van in the parking structure had been joined by a third. The afternoon moved in the specific way. Afternoons moved when something large was in the process of tipping over. Not fast, not clean, but with a gathering weight that made each hour feel denser than the last. Fitch was escorted to a federal interview room at 1:45. He arrived without an attorney, which his attorney had apparently advised against, and which he'd done anyway, which was either confidence or panic, and from the look on his face as he walked past Claire in the main corridor, it was panic. He didn't look at her. He looked at the floor with the tunnel vision of a man who had decided that if he didn't make eye contact with anything, he could still find a way through this. She stepped aside to let him pass. The former QA director, not Rourke, who was now in federal protective contact in Arizona, but a woman named Sylvia Marsh who had taken the position after Rourke left, and who had apparently spent 8 months discovering things about her department she did not like, appeared at the hospital at 3 o'clock and asked to speak with Okafor. She had brought her own files, paper, not electronic, her own copies of QA review logs going back 18 months. She kept her own records, Valdez told Claire in the tone of someone still processing this. She didn't know what was in them exactly, just knew something was wrong with the closure patterns and kept copies in case she ever needed to prove she hadn't done it. Good instinct, Claire said. She's been carrying them in her car for 6 months. Claire thought about that, about Sylvia Marsh driving to work every day with a box of documents in her trunk that she didn't know what to do with, waiting for a moment that looked safe enough to use them. The particular loneliness of knowing something was wrong and having nowhere to put the knowledge. Make sure Okafor talks to her today, she said. Not tomorrow. Today. Already on it. The ER was struggling. She could see it every time she walked past the doors, which she'd done 3 times in the last 2 hours on her way to and from places she'd had legitimate reasons to be. Torres had been joined by 2 other nurses, but the afternoon volume was up. It always was. Patients who'd put off coming in until they couldn't anymore. The 4 o'clock wave that hit every ER and every hospital in every city. And the charge nurse on duty was a man named Prentice, who was competent but was clearly managing the administrative chaos on top of the clinical load and running thin on both. At 4:17, she stopped outside the ER doors and stood there for approximately 90 seconds. Then she pushed through them. Prentice looked up from the board. His expression moved through surprise, relief, and professional caution in about 2 seconds. "You're suspended." "I know," she said. "What's in Bay 6? Chest pain, 68-year-old male. Wife says he's been having it on and off for 2 days and finally agreed to come in." "Who's triaging him?" "Torres, but she's got a pediatric in 3 and a post-fall in—" "I'll take 6. She was already moving. "You can fire me after." "You're already suspended. I can't fire you." "Then we're fine," she said, and went into Bay 6. The man in Bay 6 was named George, and he was the kind of patient who'd spent 68 years being stoic about pain and had arrived today only because his wife had physically put him in the car, which he told her in the first 45 seconds with a rueful expression that suggested he understood this was not his best decision. His wife, sitting in the chair beside the bed, had the particular tight-jawed composure of someone who had been frightened for 2 days and was managing it through logistics. "Tell me about the pain," Claire said, snapping a pulse ox onto his finger and pulling the BP cuff from the wall mount. "Pressure mostly. It's not what I expected. I thought heart stuff was like dramatic. This is just—" He pressed his fist to the center of his chest. "Like something sitting there. On and off for 2 days. Worse with exertion?" "A little. Worse when I—" He paused. "When I try to sleep, actually. Lying flat." She looked at the pulse ox. 93. BP coming up on the cuff. She watched it cycle. 162/94. EKG leads were on the wall cart, and she reached for them without looking. Muscle memory, stickers on the chest in the right configuration. Machine running in under a minute. The strip came out. She looked at it again. "Okay," she said, keeping her voice even. "George, I'm going to have the team come in, and we're going to get some labs and an imaging order in. You're in the right place." She looked at his wife. "He did the right thing coming today." The wife looked at her with the eyes of someone who understood that sentence had a subtext. "Today," the wife said. "Today," Claire confirmed, and went to get Prentice. Outside the bay, she found him 2 feet from the door, which meant he'd been watching. She handed him the strip without ceremony. He looked at it. His jaw shifted. "STEMI," he said. "Probable. Get cardiology down here and get the cath lab on standby." She looked at the board. "Who else needs eyes?" Prentice looked at her for a moment, at her scrubs, which had dried blood on the left sleeve from the morning that she hadn't had time to change, at her badgeless lanyard, at the dark circles under her eyes that had not improved in the last 9 hours. "Bay 2, he said, "and Bay 8, and if you have a minute, the kid in 3 needs a second opinion on the discharge." "Okay," she said, and moved. She worked for 2 hours and 20 minutes. Nobody came to stop her. Prentice filed no report, made no calls, said nothing to administration. The nurses who were there worked around her the way teams worked around people they trusted, which was without discussion and with the particular fluency of shared competence. George from Bay 6 went to the cath lab at 6:04. The kid in Bay 3 went home with a diagnosis that wasn't what the initial assessment had suggested, and the correct one required a phone call to his pediatrician and a prescription that Prentice signed because Claire couldn't, and a conversation with his mother that Claire had because she happened to be there and happened to be able to explain it in a way that answered the questions the mother actually had, rather than the ones she'd technically asked. At 6:22, Okafor appeared at the ER entrance. She stood outside the glass doors and looked in, and Claire looked back, and Okafor made a small gesture with her head. "Come out." Claire handed the chart she was holding to Torres, said, "BP recheck in 20, she knows," and went out. The corridor outside the ER was quieter than it had been all day. Not because things were resolved, but because the first wave of activity had crested and the second wave, the longer, slower one, was just beginning. Okafor looked like someone who had been running at operational intensity for 8 hours and was choosing not to acknowledge it yet. Hartwell is being formally arrested, she said. Charges are obstruction, conspiracy, and involuntary manslaughter. 4 counts, 1 per confirmed death. The U.S. attorney moved faster than I expected. She paused. Fitch cooperated. How much? Enough. He gave us 3 board members, including aldermen. I gave us the name of the insurance consortium contact who originated the financial protocol. He gave us his email account, which he apparently never cleared, going back 5 years. Okafor said this with the flat tone of someone still deciding how to feel about the specific irony of a man who covered his tracks meticulously in paper and not at all electronically. His attorney negotiated reduced charges in exchange. Fitch will lose his career and his license. He will not lose the next 20 years of his life. And Hartwell. Hartwell will. Okafor met her eyes. The memo is the thing. Putting the protocol in writing, with names on the distribution, makes this not negligence. It makes it policy. She paused. His attorney has not yet identified a viable defense for that document. Claire looked down the corridor. At the ER doors. At the board just visible through the glass. At Prentice moving between bays with the efficient half-attention of a charge nurse in a functioning rhythm. The families, she said. The 4 confirmed cases. They'll be notified formally through the U.S. Attorney's Office. Victim Services Protocol. Okafor paused. The Garrett family. Daniel is still in medical hold. His attorney has the preliminary documentation about the complaint suppression. I spoke to him an hour ago. She looked at Claire. He asked if the nurse who filed the concern in the first place could be named in the disclosure. He said his client wanted to know there had been someone who tried. Claire was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. He can know that. Okafor nodded. Then, you were in the ER. I was. You're suspended. I was informed of that, yes. George Tolman is going to survive his cardiac event because you caught a STEMI that had been in triage for 20 minutes without a read. Okafor's voice was precisely neutral. That's the word from cardiology. Good. The suspension is going to be an issue. I know. Prentice filed a report at 5:48 documenting your involvement and noting that the ER was operating below safe staffing levels due to administrative interference with the afternoon shift change. Okafor looked at her. He filed it with the state medical board, not with hospital administration. Claire looked at her. He's been here 11 years, Okafor said. He knows where things go when they go to administration. There was a pause. Okafor, Claire said. The false employment record, the QA sign-off with my name on it. Where does that stand? Processing. Handwriting analysis will take 24 to 48 hours to formally confirm, but the date discrepancy alone is dispositive. You have military service records placing you outside the state of Nevada on every date in that QA log. Okafor paused. You were never here. Whoever put your name on that record made one significant error. What error? They used your real name, your classified name. She tilted her head slightly. If they'd used Claire Morrow, your legal name, the name you've been using for 3 years, the name you're employed under, we'd have had a much harder time disentangling it. But they used Carter, which triggered the seal, which triggered us. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know if that was carelessness or if someone made that choice deliberately. Deliberately, Claire said. Not as a guess. As a read. That's my read too. Okafor looked at her carefully. Which means someone wanted the seal triggered. Someone wanted this to move. Claire thought about that. About Rourke. Filing the archive and driving home and putting the knowledge in a drawer for 2 years. About Sylvia Marsh carrying documents in her trunk for 6 months waiting for a window. About the specific patient-calculated use of her sealed name in a forged document, not to frame her, or not only to frame her, but to create a tripwire that would eventually, when the right moment came, detonate in a specific direction. Someone inside, she said. The investigation will determine that. Okafor put her phone in her pocket. But yes. The elevator at the end of the corridor opened, and 2 federal agents came out with Warren aldermen between them. Not in handcuffs, not yet, but with the particular escort posture that made the direction of travel non-optional. Alderman was looking ahead with the careful blankness of a man who had been in boardrooms for 40 years and had decided that the correct response to this moment was to look like he was walking to a scheduled meeting. He passed 20 feet from Claire. He looked at her. Unlike Hartwell, he didn't look away immediately. He held it for 2 seconds, not with guilt exactly, not with defiance, but with something that might have been the particular acknowledgement of a man who understood he had miscalculated and was identifying the variable that had gone wrong. She held his gaze until he was past. Okafor watched the elevator close. 6 individuals arrested or served notice across the day. 3 board members. Hartwell. 2 administrators below Fitch. She looked at her watch. The CEO of the insurance consortium received a federal subpoena at 4 o'clock at their Phoenix offices. They have until 9 tomorrow morning to produce all communications with Hargrove's executive team going back 5 years. Are they going to? Their legal counsel was still on site when my contact in Phoenix last checked. Okafor allowed herself something that was almost a dry smile. They're going to produce everything. Organizations like that, they'll throw the specific individuals overboard before 9 a.m. to protect the entity. It's not noble, but it tends to be fast. Claire nodded. Okafor started down the corridor, then stopped. Oh, one more thing. She reached into the jacket pocket of her suit and produced a small evidence bag, the clear sealed kind. Inside it was a badge. Hospital-issued Hargrove Medical, with a photo Claire recognized as her own, and a name she recognized as her working name. Found it on a wall-mounted phone in the main corridor, Okafor said. Evidence log says it was placed there by the employee at the time of suspension. A pause. It's going to stay in evidence for now because it was in the chain of custody for this morning's events. But after the investigation closes, she held the bag out anyway, and Claire took it, held it through the plastic. After it closes, Okafor said, the question of your employment status at this hospital is going to be a conversation that involves people above my clearance level. Her voice was carefully measured. That's all I can say right now. She walked away. Claire stood in the corridor holding the evidence bag with her badge in it, looking at her own photograph through the clear plastic. The one they'd taken 3 years ago during onboarding, that slightly too formal expression people had in ID photos because the camera was at an awkward height and the photographer always said, "Ready?" a half second before you were. She looked tired in it. She'd been tired when they took it too. From inside the ER, through the glass, she could see Torres moving between bays with the focused pace of someone in a functional system. The board had cleared 2 slots in the last 20 minutes. Prentice was on the phone at the charge desk, nodding at whatever he was hearing. The hospital was still running. In spite of everything, the hospital was still running, and people were still coming through those doors the way they always came. Not because the day was convenient or the circumstances were resolved, but because that was what happened when something was wrong with your body and you needed help, and the doors were still open. She put the evidence bag in her pocket. She was going to the ground floor break room, the one with worse coffee, because the one with better coffee had more people in it right now. When her phone buzzed. Unknown number, Nevada area code. She stopped, looked at it. She didn't get calls from unknown numbers. She'd structured her life for 3 years specifically to minimize the variables that unknown numbers represented. She answered. The voice on the other end was female, low, careful in the way people were careful when they were choosing each word. Is this Claire Morrow? Yes. My name is Linda Schreiber. I'm a data analyst. I used to work in Hargrove's finance department. A pause. I left 14 months ago, after I found something. In the insurance billing records. Another pause. I tried to report it internally. I was told it had been reviewed. A week later, my position was eliminated. Claire moved to the side of the corridor, out of the foot traffic. Ms. Schreiber. I know what's happening today. I've been watching the news. I've been waiting. Her voice caught slightly and then recovered. I have documents. Electronic records I copied before my access was terminated. They show something that I don't think the federal investigators have found yet. What do they show? The insurance incentive program. Schreiber's voice had gone very steady in the deliberate way of someone who had rehearsed this part. The financial protocol that drove the triage reclassifications. It wasn't Hartwell's idea. Or not originally. She paused. I have the original proposal documents. I have the email chain. And the name at the top of that chain isn't any of the people they arrested today. Claire was very still. Who? She said. Someone who isn't in that building anymore, Schreiber said. Someone who set this up and then stepped away clean 3 years ago, before any of it could be traced back. Her voice dropped. Right around the same time you were hired. Tell me where you are, Claire said. Schreiber gave an address, a storage facility in the east side of Fort Caldwell, the kind of place people rented when they needed somewhere to put things they couldn't keep at home. She said she'd been there since noon, since the first news broadcast, waiting to see if this was the moment or if she was going to drive home again and put the documents back in the unit and wait another month for a moment that felt safe enough. Stay there, Claire said. Don't leave. Don't call anyone else. I'm sending someone to you. She was already moving toward the stairs. And Miss Schreiber, how long have you had these documents? 14 months, Schreiber said. 14 months. The same window as Daniel Garrett's records requests, as Claire's buried quality concern, as the departure of the nurse who'd been fired for filing a complaint. 14 months ago, something had shifted inside Hargrove Medical Center, some tightening, some circling of wagons. And the people who'd been paying attention had all felt it at the same time without knowing the others existed. She found Okafor at the elevator. She had 30 seconds to explain. She used all of them efficiently, and by the time the elevator opened, Okafor had her phone out and was directing an agent to the storage facility address with a specificity that suggested she was very good at processing new information while already moving. The name, Okafor said. Schreiber didn't give you a name. No. But she said this person left 3 years ago, right when you were hired. Okafor looked at her as the elevator doors closed between them. I'll call you. The ground floor was different at 7 in the evening than it had been at 7 that morning. The ceremony flowers on the reception desk were still there, though someone had knocked one arrangement sideways and nobody had fixed it. The news crew had moved from the parking structure to the main entrance, where they were filming the hospital exterior with the patient medium shot framing that television used when a story was still developing and they didn't have enough specifics to cut closer. Briggs found her in the main corridor near the reception desk, and she could tell from the way he was walking, purposeful, direct, with the contained energy of someone carrying significant news, that Okafor had already reached him. Schreiber's documents, he said. Okafor's team is en route. I know. Did she give you the name? She gave Okafor the name. He stopped walking. Claire. Something in the way he said it made her stop too. The name at the top of the original insurance incentive proposal, he said. The person who designed the financial protocol and presented it to Hartwell's executive team 4 years ago, and then resigned and left before it could be traced. He paused. His name is Robert Kessler. He was the CFO of Hargrove Medical for 2 years before he resigned. She ran the name. Came up empty. I don't know him. You wouldn't. He left before you arrived, but you know his current employer. Briggs's jaw was set in the particular way it got when he was managing anger through professionalism. He's the regional director of operations for Vantage Health Consortium, the insurance entity that originated the reimbursement program. The room did a specific thing where the edges of it got very clear and the center got very still. He designed the protocol, she said, sold it to Hartwell, collected his consulting fees or his equity or whatever the arrangement was, then resigned and walked across the street to the entity that would benefit from the hospitals implementing it. And when the IG investigation opened, he was 3 layers removed from Hargrove. Private citizen, former employee, no current connection to the hospital. Briggs's voice was flat. The people he left behind took all of the exposure. And he was the one who put my name on the QA record, she said. Briggs looked at her. Okafor said someone wanted the seal triggered, someone inside who built a tripwire. She worked it through. Kessler knew about my classified record. He was CFO. He would have had access to the federal employment verification during hiring, same access Fitch had. He knew about the investigation because someone at the consortium told him. And when he felt the investigation getting close enough, he put my name on a document that would, if found, trigger my seal, bring Army IG into the picture, and potentially create enough confusion about my role to delay everything. She paused. He expected the seal to muddy the water. He didn't expect it to bring Briggs to Fort Caldwell. Nobody expected that, Briggs said with something that was almost dry humor. Frankly, I'm not supposed to be here. I involved myself the moment my office got the flag notification, and my legal team is going to have opinions about that. Do you care? Not particularly. He straightened. Kessler is in Phoenix. Okafor has been on the phone with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Arizona for the last 15 minutes. The subpoena for Vantage Health Consortium's records went to their Phoenix office at 4 o'clock this afternoon. He checked his watch. Kessler will know the subpoena landed by now. Can he run? He can try. His passport will be flagged by morning. The U.S. Attorney is moving for a material witness warrant tonight. He looked at her steadily. He's not going anywhere that matters. She absorbed that. All of it. The full architecture of it. Kessler in Phoenix. Probably right now making phone calls in the specific rapid sequence of someone trying to determine how much time they had, and the answer being very little. She looked at the sideways flower arrangement on the reception desk. Yellow and white, starting to droop at the edges now, which happened when cut flowers sat in chlorinated water under fluorescent lights for 12 hours. She reached over and straightened it, not because it mattered, just because it was there and crooked. Briggs, she said, the false employment record, with my name on it. Kessler put it there. That's the working conclusion. So for 4 years, there has been a document in existence connecting my name, my real name, to patient deaths at this hospital. Deaths I had nothing to do with. Deaths that happened because of a financial protocol someone else designed. She looked at him. And the reason it hasn't surfaced until today is because my record was sealed and nobody wanted to pull a sealed record unless they had to. Yes. And the reason I've been employed at this hospital for 3 years, undisturbed, is because Fitch knew the name was there and was either afraid of triggering the seal or was using me as insurance. If the investigation came, point at the sealed record and let the confusion do the work. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. I want it removed, she said. Formally, completely. I want documentation that the record is fraudulent and that my name has no connection to any quality failure at this hospital. That's already in process. Okafor filed the initial clearance notation 2 hours ago. The full formal expungement will take, I know it takes time. I just want to hear that it's moving. It's moving, he said. You have my word on that. She nodded. Then, what happens to Daniel Garrett? Briggs exhaled. That's complicated. He walked into a hospital with a gun. People were hurt. Kowalski is going to be okay, but he's going to have a hard 3 months of recovery ahead of him. He paused. His attorney is building a mitigation case around the record suppression, the demonstrable failure of every legitimate channel he tried. I don't know what a jury does with that. I don't know what a DA does with that. He looked at her honestly. I hope they do something that accounts for what was done to him, but I can't promise that. She hadn't expected him to promise it. She just needed to ask. Okay, she said. I'm going home. You're going home. I've been awake for, she calculated, 33 hours. I'm going home. I'm going to sleep. And tomorrow I'm going to come back and deal with whatever needs to be dealt with. She picked up her bag from where she'd left it near the reception desk, 10 hours ago, a version of this morning that felt geologically distant. Is there anything that requires me to be here tonight? No, he said. Go. She went. She slept 9 hours, which was more than she'd slept in one stretch in, longer than she could easily calculate, and woke up at 6:43 to 4 missed calls, 11 text messages, and a voicemail from a number she recognized as the Army Medical Command line that Briggs used when he was calling from the office instead of his cell. She made coffee first, stood at her kitchen counter in the early light, and drank half of it before she touched the phone. The voicemail was Briggs, and it was 40 seconds long, and the relevant part was, Kessler was detained at Phoenix Sky Harbor at 11:15 last night attempting to board a flight to Vancouver. He is in federal custody. The U.S. Attorney's Office has filed charges: conspiracy, wire fraud, involuntary manslaughter, 4 counts. Vantage Health Consortium's board voted at midnight to fully cooperate with federal investigators. They have terminated Kessler's employment and issued a public statement. A pause, and then something in Briggs's voice shifted, went quieter. Call me when you're up. She called him. He answered on the second ring. How'd you sleep? 9 hours. Good. He didn't make it smaller than it was. Did you get the voicemail? Yes, Kessler. He's talking, Briggs said. Started talking at 2 in the morning. His attorney tried to slow it down and he overrode her. I think he'd been alone with it for 4 years and the weight of it finally went somewhere he couldn't manage. A pause. He confirmed the QA record with your name. Confirmed it was deliberate. Said he chose your name specifically because a sealed classified record was, his word, untouchable. He thought it was elegant. She drank her coffee. He thought a lot of things, Briggs said, about how systems worked, about where the lines were, about what people would and wouldn't look at closely. He was right about most of it for 4 years. A pause. He was wrong about the dog. She almost laughed. It was the kind of almost laugh that was mostly just air, mostly just the release of something that had nowhere else to go. He was wrong about the dog. Nobody builds a contingency plan for an 80-pound Malinois with a long memory. She put her cup down. What happens now? For Kessler, federal prosecution, Phoenix jurisdiction. For Hartwell, same. Fitch, state and federal charges, reduced through cooperation. Alderman and the 2 other board members. Under review pending full Vantage Consortium document production. But Okafor says the email chain Schreiber provided is enough to charge at least one of them independently. He paused. For Hargrove Medical Center itself, the hospital is going to continue operating under a federal monitor. The board has been effectively dissolved pending restructuring. Patient services aren't interrupted. The ER. The ER is yours if you want it. She went still. What? Okafor cleared your employment record formally at OH 400 this morning. Your suspension is voided. Fitch didn't have cause, and the cause he claimed was fabricated from a fabricated premise. A pause. The interim administrator the state appointed last night, a woman named Renata Flores, she's done hospital restructuring for the state medical board twice before, called me at 6. She asked if I knew how to reach you. Why? Because the ER is short a charge-qualified senior nurse with 3 years of institutional knowledge, and because Prentice filed a formal commendation last night documenting your conduct during the lockdown and during the uncovered shift, and because, her words, not mine, she watched the lobby footage from this morning 6 times, and she wants the person in that footage making decisions in her emergency department. He let that land. She also said she's aware that your employment situation is complicated, and she's prepared to discuss whatever terms make sense. Claire looked out her kitchen window at the early morning light on the parking lot of her building. A woman walking a small dog along the sidewalk, the dog pulling toward a strip of grass, the woman letting it. Tell her I'll come in, she said. At 10. Not because I need to negotiate. I'll come in at my regular terms, but I need to handle something first. She drove to the Federal Processing Center at 8:30, which was where Okafor's office had told her Daniel Garrett was being held on medical hold pending formal charging. She didn't have a legal reason to be there. She had a human one. The officer at the front desk called back, and after 4 minutes, a different officer came out and told her that Garrett's attorney had been notified and had authorized a brief non-legal visit, which meant someone had already laid groundwork for exactly this, and she suspected that groundwork had Briggs's handwriting on it. They brought her to a room, plain, institutional, with a table and 2 chairs and a window that looked onto a parking structure. Garrett was already there, his arm in a proper dressing now, a sling, the pallor of someone who'd slept badly and was managing pain on the lower side of adequate medication. He looked at her when she came in, and something in his face moved. Not gratitude exactly, nothing that clean, but something in the vicinity of recognition. The particular look of someone seeing a person who was present during the worst moment of their life. I heard you filed a concern, he said, about Miles. 14 months ago. She sat down. I didn't know it was him. The internal system was anonymized. I knew it was a 17-year-old male with an appendicitis presentation who'd been classified lower than his clinical picture warranted. I filed the concern and was told it was resolved. She looked at him directly. It wasn't resolved. It was buried. I didn't know that until yesterday. He looked at the table. His jaw worked. I should have pushed harder, she said. I want to tell you that I should have pushed harder, and I didn't, because I was told it was handled and I believed the system. I don't know if pushing harder would have changed anything by that point. The timeline is complicated. But I want to say it anyway. He was quiet for a long moment. You went in, he said finally. Yesterday, when everyone else was outside. Yes. Why? She thought about it. The real answer, not the professional one. Because I saw the board through the glass and I knew what was in there, and 12 minutes is a long time, she paused. And because I've spent a long time knowing how to be in rooms that are dangerous, and I couldn't stand outside one when there was something I could do. He looked up at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, the specific raw redness of someone who had cried recently and not slept. I was a good kid. Miles. He stopped. Started again. He was going to study architecture. He had this whole thing about how cities breathe, how the spaces between buildings were as important as the buildings. He stopped again. He talked too much sometimes. He could talk for an hour about one idea. He looked at the table. I'd give anything to hear him talk for an hour. She didn't say she was sorry. She'd already decided she wasn't going to say that. The people who did this are being charged, she said. All of them. The people who built the system, the people who ran it, the people who buried the complaints. It's not going to bring him back. I know that, but it's real, and it's documented, and it's going to be prosecuted. She met his gaze. He's not going to be a complication in someone's quarterly report. He's going to be a name in a federal prosecution. That's different. Garrett looked at her for a long time. Yeah, he said. His voice was rough. It is. She left the processing center at 9:15 and drove to Hargrove Medical Center for the second time in 2 days, which was strange in the specific way that returning to a place was strange after something irreversible had happened in it. The building looked the same. The parking structure looked the same. The staff entrance on the south side, where she badged in with a temporary credential Renata Flores' office had sent to her phone, looked exactly the same. The ER looked the same, and also entirely different. Flores was a compact woman in her 50s with short gray hair and the practiced directness of someone who had spent a career making decisions in institutions that resisted them. She met Claire in the small office adjacent to the charge desk that had been Prentice's operational base for the last 12 hours and would be Claire's from now on, if she wanted it, which Flores communicated not by asking the question, but by the way she stood slightly to the side of the desk when Claire came in, leaving the space open. They talked for 40 minutes. Not about terms. Flores had been right that there wasn't much to negotiate. The terms were standard, and Claire had no interest in leveraging the circumstances into anything more than what the job was. They talked about the ER, about staffing gaps, about the QA system that was going to need to be rebuilt from scratch under federal monitor oversight, about what a clinical reporting structure looked like when the previous one had been designed to suppress exactly what it was supposed to surface. I want a direct line to the federal monitor for any quality concern filed in this department, Claire said. Not through administration, not through a board committee, direct. The monitor will require that anyway, Flores said. That's the standard for facilities under federal oversight. I know. I want it formalized before the oversight ends, not as a temporary condition. She looked at Flores. When the monitor leaves and the hospital restructures, I want that channel to be structural, built into the reporting architecture, not dependent on who's running the hospital or what the quarterly numbers look like. Flores studied her. That's going to require board-level approval from whatever board gets constituted. Yes, so put it in the restructuring charter, before the board exists. She held Flores's gaze. The system that let this happen wasn't a failure of bad people getting lucky. It was a design. The reporting channels were designed to absorb complaints without producing consequences. If you rebuild the same architecture with different people, you get the same outcome eventually. Flores was quiet for a moment. Then she made a note. An actual note. On a legal pad, with a pen, in handwriting. The charter goes to the state medical board for review in 3 weeks, she said. If this is in the draft, they'll see it. Good, Claire said. She started her shift at noon. The weeks that followed were not triumphant in any of the ways that word usually meant. They were dense and procedural and frequently exhausting, and the ER ran short on some days, and on others ran with the particular rough fluency of a team that had been through something together and was still sorting out what that meant. Okafor's investigation expanded twice, once when the Vantage Consortium documents produced a 5th hospital in the Mountain West that had implemented the same financial protocol, and once when a former Hargrove administrator who had relocated to Idaho came forward with documentation of a board meeting 3 years ago at which the triage reclassification protocol had been explicitly discussed, minutes and all. The Idaho administrator had kept the meeting minutes because he'd been uncomfortable and hadn't known what else to do with the discomfort. He'd put them in a fireproof box in his garage and not told anyone for 3 years. There were a lot of people like that, Claire came to understand. People who had seen something and written it down and put it somewhere safe and waited. Not cowards, not collaborators, people who were trying to determine if there was a moment that was safe enough and stable enough to use what they knew. People who needed someone to go first. She testified before the federal grand jury in the third week of November. The testimony took 4 hours and covered the triage system, the quality concern, the transition period documentation, her conversation with Daniel Garrett in Bay 5, and the clinical picture on every patient she'd managed during the lockdown. The federal prosecutor was thorough and good at her job, and Claire answered every question with the same flat precision she'd used with the stenographer. Clinical, complete, human enough to be real. She stumbled once. The same word. Routine. The prosecutor asked her to describe the standard expectation for a pediatric appendicitis case at a facility with Hargrove's surgical resources, and she said the word before she could route around it. And then she stopped for 4 seconds, and the prosecutor waited, and she continued. Some words were always going to cost something. That was one of them. Kevin Hartwell entered a guilty plea in December. His attorney had spent 6 weeks looking for a viable defense for a document in his own handwriting that laid out a protocol resulting in 4 deaths, and had apparently concluded that viable was not the right adjective. He pled to conspiracy and 4 counts of negligent homicide under federal standards. The sentencing was scheduled for February. Robert Kessler went to trial. He'd stopped talking in the second week after his arrest, apparently having reconsidered the 2 a.m. confession and decided he wanted to attempt a different strategy, which his attorney pursued with competence and without apparent optimism. The trial lasted 9 days. Linda Schreiber testified for 3 hours. The email chain establishing Kessler as the architect of the insurance incentive protocol was entered into evidence and read aloud in court, which had the specific quality of a man's own words, becoming the walls of the room he was standing in. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. Claire was not in the courtroom for the verdict. She was in the ER, where a woman had come in at 2 in the afternoon with a headache she'd had for 3 days that nobody around her had taken seriously, and which was not a headache. She was on the phone with neurology when Okafor texted. 2 words, guilty, all. She looked at the message, put her phone in her pocket, told neurology they needed the team down in 20 minutes, not 30. The Army ceremony was on a Thursday in January, which was cold in Fort Caldwell, in the way that Nevada cold was different from the cold she'd known elsewhere, dry and clear, without the weight of it, the kind of cold that felt honest about itself. Briggs had told her about it 3 weeks prior, with the specific diplomatic care of someone who understood that the offer could be declined. She'd thought about it for 4 days before she'd said yes. It was not a large ceremony, not a parade, not a public event. A formal military recognition in a conference room at Peterson with 8 people present, 4 of them active military and 4 of them civilian, including Briggs and Okafor, and at Claire's request, Marcus Webb, who had shown up in his civilian clothes with his hands in his pockets and the slightly overwhelmed expression of someone who had not expected to be included. Sergeant Alvarez was there. Rico was there, which required a conversation with the facility and which Briggs had apparently handled without making it a significant thing, because when Claire arrived, the dog was already in the room, sitting beside Alvarez with the composed attention of an animal that was exactly where it was supposed to be. The medal was the Army Commendation Medal with a Valor device, which Briggs pinned himself, which was not standard protocol, and which he did anyway without explaining why, and which she understood to mean something that didn't require explaining. She stood straight while he pinned it. She didn't feel triumphal. She thought about the word while Briggs was speaking, the formal language of military commendation that she hadn't heard directed at herself in years. She felt present, which was different from fine, different from healed, different from resolved, just present, here, in this room, in this body, with this record, with all of it. Briggs finished speaking. She looked at him. "You've been trying to find me for 2 years, she said. It wasn't an accusation. Yes. Why? He looked at her with the steady consideration of someone who had asked himself this question and had an answer he stood behind. Because what happened to you in Kandahar, the way you were processed out, the way the record was handled, that wasn't right. And I knew it wasn't right when it happened, and I let the bureaucracy tell me the file was closed." He paused. "I've been carrying that." She thought about Rourke with his archive. Marsh with her trunk full of documents, Schreiber in a storage unit. All the people carrying things, waiting for the weight to become something they could put down. It wasn't your fault, she said.
No, but I could have pushed harder. She almost smiled. Yeah, that seems to be the thing everybody says. He looked at her for a moment, and something in it was almost warm. Not the warmth of people who'd known each other for a long time, but the specific warmth of people who understood each other accurately. Rico moved from beside Alvarez and sat on her left foot. She looked down at him. He looked up with the dark, complete attention of an animal that had made a decision about a person and was not revisiting it. He does that, Alvarez said from across the room. I know, she said.
She went back to work the next morning. This was not inspiring in any particular way. The shift started at 7. A pediatric respiratory case was waiting in Bay 2 before she'd had her first coffee, and the overnight nurse who handed off to her looked like she'd had the specific kind of night that aged a person slightly. She triaged. She assessed. She argued with an attending physician about an imaging order and was right, and then apologized for how she'd said it, because she'd been blunter than was fair given the circumstances. She caught an error in a medication reconciliation before it reached a patient. She talked a 60-year-old man through a panic attack that had presented as chest pain, which required a different kind of attention than chest pain, but was no less real. At 11:40, she got a text from a number she didn't recognize that turned out to be Daniel Garrett's attorney, forwarding a message Garrett wanted her to have. It was short. It said, "My son talked too much. I think you would have liked him. Thank you for trying." She read it twice, put the phone away, went to Bay 6, where a teenage girl with a sprained wrist was trying not to cry, and sat down next to the bed and explained what was going to happen next in the specific way she'd learned worked. Not clinical, not falsely cheerful, just direct and human, and here. She was not a hero in the sense that word usually moved through the world. She hadn't come to this hospital to expose anything or save anyone in any large systemic way. She'd come because it was a job and she'd needed one and she was good at it, and she'd filed a quality concern because filing quality concerns was what you did when something was wrong. And she'd walked into a lockdown ER because the alternative was standing outside while people were hurt. And she'd handed over a document from a filing cabinet because the document was true, and truth was more useful than silence. That was the whole of it. Not clean, not smooth. Full of moments where she'd stayed in the corridor when she should have pushed through, and moments where she'd pushed through when she should have waited. And one very long conversation with a federal stenographer where she'd stumbled on a single word and taken 4 seconds and then kept going. The keeping going was the thing that mattered, not the grace of it, not the dramatic clarity of it, just the plain continued fact of it, that you saw what was in front of you and you did the next thing and then the next thing, and you kept your records, and you told the truth when someone finally asked, and you went back to work the morning after someone pinned a medal on your chest, because the shift started at 7, and there was a child in Bay 2 who needed someone to pay attention. She had done this job in a building that was trying to use her as a shield, and hadn't known it, and now she was doing this job in a building that was being rebuilt from its foundation, and the job was the same. What had changed was that nobody was going to bury the paperwork. That was the structural thing. The thing she'd asked Flores to put in the charter, the thing the state board would review, the thing that would outlast her employment there, and outlast the federal oversight period, and outlast whatever version of Hargrove Medical Center emerged from the restructuring. A direct line. A channel that didn't flow through the people who stood to lose from what it carried. A mechanism designed to ensure that the next person who saw something wrong had somewhere real to put it, small, bureaucratic, unglamorous. Also the thing that could prevent the next Miles Garrett from becoming a case number. She thought sometimes about the people who had carried documents for months and years, waiting for a moment that felt safe. About the particular loneliness of that. About what it meant that it had taken a military dog, and a hospital ceremony, and a man with a gun, and a 30-year-old woman who hadn't slept to create the conditions under which those people could finally put what they were carrying down. The system that had buried the truth had been built by specific people making specific choices, which meant it could be unbuilt the same way. Specifically, structurally, one design decision at a time. That was not a comfortable thing to hold. It was not a triumphant thing. It was just true, the way a blood pressure reading was true, the way a triage assessment was true. Neither good news nor bad news in itself, just information that told you what the next thing was. At 2:17, she was reviewing labs in the corridor when Marcus appeared from the direction of the staff entrance, looking slightly out of breath and somewhat pleased with himself. He handed her a coffee from the good machine upstairs, which meant he'd taken the stairs. "You went to the second floor," she said. "The coffee's better up there." "I know." She took it. "What are you doing here? Your shift doesn't start until 3. "I came in early." He shrugged with the specific casualness of someone who had made a deliberate choice and was not going to make much of it. "Figured you could use someone who knows where everything is while the new staff gets oriented." She looked at him. At the early gray in his hair, the 11-year badge, the way he stood in the corridor of this ER like someone who had taken root in it and grown around it and was not going anywhere. "Marcus," she said. "Yeah. Thank you. For yesterday. For the last—" She stopped. "For everything." He looked faintly uncomfortable, which was how Marcus looked when something genuine happened to him. "You would have done the same." "I know. I'm saying it anyway." He took the coffee back, drank some of it, returned it. "Prentice says you fought with cardiology yesterday." "I was right." "Were you nice about it?" "Approximately." "Okay," he said, like this was an acceptable answer, and fell into step beside her as she moved toward the board, and the afternoon continued the way. Afternoons continued in emergency medicine. Not triumphant, not resolved, not clean, just full of the next thing, and the next, and the next. Down the hall, in the lobby, in the corner by the staff entrance where he'd been allowed to wait because Alvarez had filled out the correct paperwork and Flores had approved it, Rico was asleep on a folded blanket, dreaming something that made his paws move slightly, some long-running pursuit that he was still working through. He would go back with Alvarez at the end of the week. That was always the plan. He was a working military animal, not a mascot, and Alvarez had duties that required them both. But today he was here. And Claire Morrow, who had once been Captain Claire Carter, who had carried a false name and a sealed record, and a 14-month-old document in a filing cabinet drawer, who had walked into a locked ER and sat on a cold floor with a man who had nothing left and told him to put down the gun, who had gone home and slept and come back, who had asked for a direct line in a hospital charter because the small structural things were the ones that lasted. Claire Morrow was at the nurses' station, reviewing a board, doing the next thing. Nobody in the corridor was watching her. That was fine. She had never needed anyone to watch.